Hey Dead Signal FM viewers, getting ready for bed? Wishing you a calm and cozy night. Before we start, where are you watching from and what time is it? Let's get started. The first snow of the season dusted the tops of the pines as I made my way up the maintenance road. 6 years at Blackwater Ridge National Forest, and winter still arrived like an uninvited guest, too early and staying too long. My boots crunched against the frozen ground, each step sending small puffs of condensation into the air as I exhaled. The park was quiet this time of year, most tourists gone by mid-October, leaving only the occasional backpacker who thought themselves hardier than the elements. I'm Ranger Thomas Mercer, though most folks just call me Ranger Tom. Not that there were many people to call me anything out here these days. Just me and the forest for the next 2 weeks while I managed the northern station. 2 weeks of solitude before the rotation brought Riley up to relieve me. My radio crackled. Northern station, this is headquarters. Radio check. Over. I pulled the device from my belt. This is Northern, reading you clear. Weather's holding stable, but we've got snow starting. Over. Copy that, Northern. Just checking in before the storm system moves through. Weather service says it might be a heavy one. You good on supplies? Over. Fully stocked. Should be fine unless we get something biblical. Over. Roger that. Next check-in at 0800 tomorrow. Over and out. I clipped the radio back to my belt and continued up the path. Headquarters was being cautious after what happened to Ranger Davidson 3 winters back. Got snowed in when an unexpected blizzard hit, ran out of propane. By the time they reached him, frostbite had claimed 3 fingers and part of his left ear. The forest doesn't forgive carelessness. The northern station was a sturdy cabin built in the 1950s, nestled in a small clearing about 14 miles from the main visitor center. It served as both observation post and emergency shelter, perched on a ridge that offered views stretching north into untouched wilderness. Miles of forest that rolled away toward the Canadian border. Most days, I appreciated the isolation. Today, though, something felt off. Couldn't place it. Something in the air, maybe. The animals were quieter than usual, even for approaching winter. No chickadees chattering in the pines. No squirrels busy with last-minute preparations. Just silence, broken only by my footsteps and the occasional whisper of wind through bare branches. The cabin came into view through the trees, dark wood weathered by decades of sun and snow, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. Riley must have stoked the fire before heading down to headquarters this morning. Good man, Riley. Always thoughtful like that. Inside, the cabin was warm and familiar. A single large room with a wood stove, desk for paperwork, radio equipment, and a small kitchenette. Through a door at the back was a sparse bedroom with a cot and a tiny bathroom with a shower that ran hot water for exactly 4 minutes before giving up. Luxury accommodations by backcountry standards. I hung my heavy coat on the hook by the door, checking my watch. Just past 2 in the afternoon. Plenty of daylight left to do my first patrol circuit before dark. The patrol routes were fairly standard. A 3-mile loop west to check on the Aspen Grove campsite, closed for the season but occasionally used by unauthorized campers, then east to inspect the dam at Morgan Creek. With the snow coming, I needed to make sure there wasn't any beaver activity threatening to flood the lower trails. I loaded my pack with the essentials. First aid kit, emergency blanket, extra socks, protein bars, water purification tablets, flare gun. Standard procedure even for a short patrol. I'd seen too many day hikers get lost or injured with nothing but a bottle of water and a granola bar to risk going light. The trail west was peaceful, disturbed only by the occasional snap of a branch surrendering to the weight of gathering snow. I made my notes methodically as I walked, condition of trails, animal sign, any evidence of human activity. Nothing unusual at the Aspen Grove site. No embers in the fire pits, no footprints. The forest was being cooperative today. It was on the eastern leg of my patrol, approaching Morgan Creek, that I noticed something strange. A set of tracks in the thin layer of snow, heading north off the main trail. Too large for deer, not quite right for bear. Not human either. Something with a long stride, pressing deep into the soil. Whatever made them was heavy. Standard procedure when encountering unusual tracks. Document, photograph, report. I pulled out my camera and snapped several pictures, placing my knife beside the print for scale. Almost 18 inches long, with what looked like 4 distinct toe impressions at the front. No clear claw marks. I'd been tracking wildlife in these woods for years and had never seen prints like these. I considered following them but checked my watch again. 3:45 p.m. Light would be fading by 5 o'clock this time of year, and the incoming storm clouds were stealing what little daylight remained. The temperature was dropping rapidly. I could feel it in my fingers as I put away the camera. The tracks would have to wait for tomorrow. Morgan Creek was flowing normally, the small dam clear of debris. I made my final notes and turned back toward the station, picking up my pace slightly. Something about those tracks had unsettled me, though I'd never admit it to the other rangers. Just an unknown animal, probably. Maybe a non-native species someone had released illegally. Wouldn't be the first time. The light was nearly gone when I reached the cabin. The forest around me transformed into looming shadows. I built up the fire in the stove, hung my damp outer layers to dry, and radioed in my daily report, mentioning the unusual tracks. Headquarters acknowledged without much interest. They'd wait for the photos before deciding if it warranted further investigation. After a simple dinner of reheated stew, I transferred the day's photos to my laptop and examined the tracks more carefully. They still didn't match anything in my experience. I sent the images to headquarters with a note requesting identification, then prepared for bed. The wind had picked up outside, moaning through the pines in that peculiar way that always sounded almost like words. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the strengthening storm. Around 2 a.m., I woke suddenly, unsure why. The cabin was cold, the fire had died down to embers. But that wasn't what had wakened me. I lay still, listening. There, a sound outside. Not the wind. Something moving around the cabin. Wildlife investigating human structures isn't uncommon. Bears, in particular, get curious about cabins, especially if they smell food. I reached for my flashlight, fully awake now. The noise came again. A slow, deliberate scraping along the eastern wall of the cabin. Not a bear's random investigation. This was methodical. I pulled on my boots and took my sidearm from its lockbox. Standard issue for rangers in areas with dangerous wildlife. Probably nothing to worry about, but no point in taking chances. The scraping continued, moving toward the back of the cabin now. Standing by the window, I shone my flashlight out into the darkness. The beam caught swirling snow, illuminating the clearing for about 20 feet before the storm swallowed the light. Nothing visible, but the scraping had stopped the moment my light hit the window. I waited, listening. Silence now except for the wind. After 5 minutes of nothing, I convinced myself it had been a branch dragging against the cabin wall, pushed by the storm. I returned to bed but kept my boots on and the sidearm within reach. Morning came gray and subdued, the storm having moved on during the night, leaving behind 8 inches of fresh snow blanketing everything in sight. I radioed headquarters for the morning check-in. Northern station to headquarters. Morning report, over. Static hissed back at me. I tried again. Northern station to headquarters. Radio check, over. More static, then a broken fragment of voice before the connection failed completely. The storm must have damaged something in the relay system. Not uncommon, but inconvenient. The satellite phone would work for emergencies, but for routine communication, I'd have to wait until the radio technician could address the issue. After breakfast, I decided to investigate the tracks from yesterday, now likely covered by fresh snow. I also needed to check the eastern perimeter where the old fire lookout tower stood. It had been decommissioned years ago, but we still maintained it as a historical structure. The forest had transformed overnight, pristine white broken only by the occasional dark branches bowing under the weight of snow. Beautiful but treacherous, easy to get turned around when all landmarks disappeared under a uniform blanket of white. I found where the strange tracks had been, but as expected, they were completely obscured by fresh snowfall. Continuing east, I made my way toward the lookout tower, blazing my own trail through knee-deep drifts in some places. The tower appeared through the trees, a skeletal silhouette against the gray sky, 50 feet tall, with a small enclosed cabin at the top accessible by a series of switchback stairs wrapping around the structure. As I approached, something caught my eye, movement at the top of the tower. I stopped, raising my binoculars. The observation cabin's door was open, swinging gently in the breeze. That wasn't right. The tower was secured at the end of each season. All doors locked, windows shuttered. Protocol dictated that I investigate and resecure the structure. I approached cautiously, looking for signs of visitors, footprints, equipment, anything to indicate who might have accessed the tower. The snow around the base was undisturbed except for small animal tracks, rabbit and squirrel. Nothing human. Nothing like the large tracks from yesterday either. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed, ice cracking and falling away from the metal treads. At the top landing, I paused to catch my breath, looking out across the vast expanse of white-covered forest stretching in all directions. From this height, I could see storm clouds gathering again on the western horizon. We were in for another round by nightfall. The door to the observation cabin swung open and closed in the wind, hinges protesting with each movement. Inside, the small space was cold and empty. A single room with windows on all sides, an old desk bolted to the floor, a wood stove that hadn't been used in years. Nothing seemed disturbed or damaged. No signs of recent human presence. I checked the door's lock. The hasp was broken, metal bent outward as if forced from inside. Oh, very odd. I made a note to report it when communications were back up and used some wire from my pack to secure the door as best I could. On the desk, something caught my eye. A single piece of paper, yellowed with age but clearly not part of the tower's original equipment. I picked it up carefully. It was a page torn from a journal, the handwriting faded but still legible in places. Third team missing. They aren't acknowledging the pattern, but I've mapped it. Always from the north, always during first snow. The hollow isn't on any Forest Service map, but the locals know. They've always known. They leave offerings at the old stone circle. The rest was too faded to read. The date at the top of the page read November 17th, 1976. Almost 50 years ago. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my pocket. Probably nothing, old folklore and superstition, but worth documenting nonetheless. The wind was picking up as I descended the tower, the temperature dropping noticeably. The storm was moving in faster than I'd anticipated. I needed to get back to the cabin before visibility dropped. Halfway back, I realized I was being followed. Nothing obvious. No clear footsteps behind me. Just the certainty that something was tracking my movements through the trees to my left, paralleling my path about 30 yards into the dense pines. Occasionally branches would sway against the wind, or snow would fall suddenly from a bough when nothing had disturbed it. I maintained my pace, hand resting on my sidearm. Rule 1 of wildlife encounters: don't run. Running triggers pursuit. I scanned the tree line continuously but saw nothing concrete, just shadows and movement at the edge of perception. The cabin was a welcome sight when it finally appeared through the trees. Whatever had been following me seemed to have fallen back, unwilling to approach the clearing. I locked the door behind me, stoked the fire, and tried the radio again. Still nothing but static. As daylight faded, the storm arrived in full force, wind howling around the cabin's eaves. I found myself returning to the window repeatedly, staring out into the swirling snow, feeling watched. The broken page from the tower nagged at my thoughts. The hollow isn't on any Forest Service map. I pulled out the topographical maps of the region, spreading them across the desk. The northern section of the park was mostly unmarked wilderness. Few trails, minimal infrastructure. A series of ridges and valleys, densely forested. Nothing labeled as a hollow specifically, but there was a circular depression about 4 miles north of my position, ringed by steep hills. No trails led there. It was firmly in the untracked wilderness zone. If someone wanted to disappear in Blackwater Ridge, that would be the place to do it. The satellite phone buzzed, startling me. I answered quickly. Northern Station, Ranger Mercer speaking. Tom? Thank God. It was Diane from headquarters, her voice tight with concern. "We've been trying to reach you on all channels. Radio's down. Storm damage, I assume. What's going on? We received your photo of those tracks yesterday. Tom, we need you to return to headquarters immediately. Pack essential gear and start back at first light." "What? Why? What did you find out about the tracks?" A pause, then, "The photos you sent, they don't match anything in our databases. We forwarded them to Fish and Wildlife. Their zoologist called personally, said they're inconsistent with any known North American species." I looked out the window at the raging storm. "Diane, I can't leave in this weather. The trail will be impassable by morning." "What aren't you telling me?" Another pause, longer this time. "There's something else. Riley never made it back to headquarters yesterday." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "He left here at dawn. Should have made it back by early afternoon. He never arrived. We sent out a search team this morning before the storm hit. They found his pack on the main trail, about 5 miles south of your position. No sign of Riley." I sank into the chair by the radio. Riley was experienced, one of our best. Not the type to wander off trail or take unnecessary risks. "His emergency beacon?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Never activated." "Tom, this isn't the first incident. We didn't want to cause panic, but there have been 3 disappearances in that region in the past month. 2 hikers in October, now Riley, all in the northern section." The page in my pocket suddenly felt heavy. "Diane, I found something today at the lookout tower. A journal page from the 70s, mentioning missing teams and something about a hollow to the north. The old Marshall Hollow? That's been off limits since before my time. There was an incident there in the 80s, never got the full story. Listen, Tom, just sit tight. Once the storm passes, we're sending a team up. Should be there by tomorrow afternoon. I'll be ready," I assured her, but my mind was racing. 3 recent disappearances. The strange tracks, Riley missing, and now this mysterious hollow. "Be careful, Tom. Keep the cabin secured. Check in every 2 hours by sat phone." After we disconnected, I rechecked all windows and door locks, then laid out my gear for a possible evacuation tomorrow. Outside, the storm raged on, snow piling against the north-facing windows until they were completely obscured. Around midnight, the wind died suddenly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I sat up in bed, listening. Something felt wrong. The silence was too complete, too absolute. Even in the deadest part of winter, the forest has a pulse. The creak of branches, the settling of snow, the distant call of a night bird. But there was nothing. Then I heard it. A low, rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere to the north. Not mechanical, too irregular. It reminded me of a heartbeat, but massive, as if the mountains themselves were pulsing. The sound continued for several minutes, then faded. Sleep was impossible after that. I kept the lights low and checked the windows regularly. Around 3 a.m., I noticed tracks in the fresh snow leading up to the cabin. The same unusual prints I'd photographed the day before. They circled the entire structure once, then headed directly north. I documented them carefully, took new photographs, then tried to raise headquarters on the sat phone. No connection. Dawn brought clear skies and bitter cold. The temperature readout showed -15, unusually cold for November, even here. I packed my emergency bag, strapped on snowshoes, and prepared to meet the evacuation team partway. Before leaving, I studied the maps again, focusing on the depression that might be the hollow mentioned in the journal page. Something about its position seemed significant. I overlaid the locations of the recent disappearances as reported by Diane. All 3 had occurred along a rough line pointing directly toward the hollow. Same with the tracks I'd found, all oriented north, toward that same location. Curiosity and concern for Riley overwhelmed my better judgment. Instead of heading south toward headquarters, I set my compass north. I would do a quick reconnaissance of the hollow, then circle back to meet the evacuation team. 4 hours up, 4 hours back. I'd still intercept them by late afternoon. I left a note detailing my plan and departed, following the strange tracks northward. They maintained a straight line regardless of terrain, sometimes disappearing where they crossed rocky outcroppings, but always resuming on the other side in the same unwavering direction. The forest grew denser as I moved north, old-growth trees blocking much of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight beneath their canopy. The snow was deeper here, undisturbed by wind. No animal tracks crossed my path, no squirrels, no deer, no birds. Just the single line of unidentifiable prints I was following. 3 hours in, the terrain began to slope downward. I was approaching the edge of the hollow. The tracks led directly to the rim, then disappeared over the edge. I paused, taking stock of my surroundings. The hollow was larger than it had appeared on the map, a nearly perfect circle perhaps a mile across, ringed by steep slopes. From my vantage point, I could see the entire depression. The bottom was relatively flat, covered in snow, with a small clearing at the center where something dark protruded from the white blanket. Without binoculars, it was hard to identify, but it appeared to be a structure of some kind, perhaps the stone circle mentioned in the journal. As I stood observing, that same rhythmic thumping from the night before began again, louder now, clearly emanating from somewhere below. The snow at the center of the hollow seemed to rise and fall slightly with each pulse, as if something underneath was breathing. All my instincts screamed to turn back, but Riley might be down there. I began a careful descent, using the trees for support on the steeper sections. Halfway down, I noticed the forest was changing. The trees here were different, twisted and gnarled, growing in unnatural patterns. Some appeared to be fused together at the trunks, creating archways and tunnels of living wood. The air grew warmer as I descended, despite the altitude drop being minimal. The snow thinned, revealing patches of bare ground, not frozen as it should be, but soft and moist. In some places, pale mushrooms pushed through the soil, pulsing gently with that same rhythm that filled the air. At the bottom of the hollow, the tracks I'd been following joined dozens of similar prints, all converging on the central clearing. The structure I'd spotted from above was indeed a stone circle. 7 rough megaliths arranged around a flat central stone that resembled an altar. The stones were covered in carvings, spirals, concentric circles, and figures that were almost but not quite human. The ground around the circle was bare, steam rising from the soil as if it were being heated from below. The thumping was loudest here, so powerful I could feel it vibrating through my boots. Near one of the standing stones lay a backpack, Forest Service issue. Riley's. I rushed forward, checking for any sign of him, but found only the abandoned pack. His gear was still inside, including his satellite phone and emergency beacon, both functional but never activated. A sound caught my attention, a rustling from the far side of the stone circle. I drew my sidearm and moved cautiously around the perimeter. Behind the largest standing stone, a figure crouched back toward me. "Riley," I called, hope and dread warring in my chest. "Riley, it's Tom." The figure straightened but didn't turn. It was wearing a Forest Service uniform, but something was wrong. The proportions were off, the shoulders too broad, the arms too long. "Riley, are you hurt? We need to get out of here." Finally, it began to turn. I raised my flashlight, illuminating the figure fully, and immediately wished I hadn't. It wore Riley's face, but wrongly, like a mask that didn't quite fit. The skin was stretched too tight across the skull, the eyes set too far apart, the mouth a rigid line that didn't move when it spoke. "Tom." The voice was Riley's, but flat, emotionless. "You need to see. You need to understand." Took a step toward me. I backed away, keeping my sidearm raised. "What happened to you? What is this place?" The hollow has always been here, older than the forest, older than the mountains. The thing wearing Riley's face tilted its head at an impossible angle. "It was hungry. It's always hungry in winter. Where's Riley? The real Riley?" A smile spread across its face, too wide, revealing too many teeth. "I am Riley now. His thoughts, his memories, but improved." It gestured toward the center stone. The hollow needed a ranger, someone with access, someone who knows the forest. The rhythmic thumping grew louder, and the ground at the center of the circle began to bulge upward, soil and stone pushing aside as something underneath strained to surface. I fired a warning shot into the air. "Stay back. I'm leaving, and I'm reporting everything I've seen here." The Riley thing laughed, a hollow sound that echoed strangely in the clearing. "No one will believe you. No one ever believes. Why do you think this place isn't on the maps? They know. They've always known. Easier to lose a few visitors than admit what lives here." The ground split open at the center of the circle, a fissure widening between the stones. Warm air rushed out, carrying a smell like wet earth and decay. From the darkness below, something began to emerge. A massive, pale appendage, segmented like an insect's leg but thick as a tree trunk. I ran, scrambling up the slope, boots slipping on patches of ice, branches tearing at my clothing. Behind me, the Riley thing made no move to follow, but its voice carried clearly through the trees. "It's too late, Tom. You breathed the air. You heard the call. Part of you will always be here now." I didn't stop running until I reached the rim of the hollow. Looking back down, I could see movement throughout the depression, the trees themselves shifting position, closing ranks, obscuring the central clearing from view. The thumping continued, but now it seemed to come from inside my own chest, matching my racing heartbeat. The journey back to the cabin was a blur. Somehow, I made it before dark, packed only the most essential gear, and began the long trek south toward headquarters. I encountered the evacuation team 5 miles down the trail, 4 rangers in full winter gear, armed and alert. I told them everything, showed them the journal page, the new photographs of the tracks, Riley's satellite phone, which I'd taken from his pack. They exchanged glances, faces grim but unsurprised. "The hollow's been active again," the team leader said finally. "Happens every few decades. We seal it off, put the area off limits, wait for it to go dormant." "You knew." My voice cracked. "You knew and you still sent rangers up here? You sent Riley up here? We thought it was dormant. 50 years, no incidents. Until last month. She wouldn't meet my eyes. We need to evacuate the entire northern sector. Headquarters has already started moving people out of the southern campgrounds, just in case." "In case of what?" Instead of answering, she handed me a satellite phone. "Director wants to speak with you." The conversation with the park director was brief and terrifying. The hollow was indeed known to the Forest Service, had been since the first surveys in the 1930s. Indigenous peoples had avoided the area for centuries before that, leaving offerings at the perimeter to appease whatever lived within. Every 40 to 50 years it would wake up, beginning with animal disappearances, then hikers, then anyone within reach. The only solution they'd found was to evacuate, seal all access, and wait for it to return to dormancy. "But what is it?" I demanded. "We don't know," the director admitted. "Some kind of hibernating organism, maybe a fungal colony that affects brain chemistry, or maybe exactly what the local legends say it is, a piece of the old world that never quite died. All we know is that it's territorial, it's intelligent in some way, and it can change people." "Riley isn't Riley anymore." "I'm sorry." They evacuated the entire park the next day. National Guard units created a perimeter 20 miles out from the hollow. Official story: environmental hazard, possible toxic spill. The real containment operation was classified at the highest levels. I was debriefed, examined, blood tested, brain scanned. They found nothing physically wrong with me, but put me on indefinite leave anyway. Standard procedure for anyone who'd been that close to the hollow while it was active. They offered me a transfer to a park in Arizona. Desert landscape, no deep forests, nothing hiding underground. I accepted, but each night, I still hear that rhythmic thumping, like a massive heartbeat somewhere deep below. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the hollow, that perfect circle nestled among the northern pines. Waiting, hungry, the strangest part? Sometimes I find myself walking north in my sleep. My new cabin is decorated with maps of my new park, my new home. But when no one is looking, I find myself drawing that circle on them, adding the hollow where it doesn't belong, marking the place that marked me, because part of me is still there. Part of me always will be. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear Riley's voice calling me home. They say the Clearwater wilderness changes people. 6 months into my posting here, I'm beginning to understand why. My supervisor mentioned it during orientation, his weathered face creasing into what might have been a smile or a grimace. The isolation gets to some folks. Others find they can't leave. Then he laughed, a dry sound like dead leaves skittering across asphalt. I nodded politely, thinking he was just trying to spook the new guy. This morning marks day 183 at Clearwater Ranger Station. The calendar on my cabin wall bears small, neat X's tracking my time in this vast, primeval forest. Far from any major city, the stars at night hang impossibly bright and numerous, crowding the sky like watching eyes. During the day, ancient pines stretch toward heaven, their shadows casting the forest floor in perpetual twilight. I start my morning as always, coffee brewed strong enough to stand a spoon in, a quick check of weather conditions, and a review of the day's patrol route. Standard procedure, comfortable routine. My radio crackles occasionally with transmissions from other rangers, though they're few and far between in this sprawling wilderness. Clear skies today, decent visibility. Temperature holding steady at 52 degrees. I note in my logbook, my pen scratching across the page, the only sound besides the gentle ticking of the wall clock. No reported fires or disturbances. The forest has been quiet lately. Too quiet, perhaps. Tourist season ended weeks ago, and only the occasional hardy backpacker ventures this deep into Clearwater now that autumn has sharpened its teeth. I don't mind the solitude. After 8 years of city policing, the peace of these ancient woods was exactly what I needed, or so I thought. The trail ahead of me winds through stands of towering pines. Their trunks, some wider than my outstretched arms can encircle, have stood here for centuries. The air carries the mingled sense of pine resin, damp earth, and decaying leaves, the perfume of wilderness untouched. My boots crunch softly on the needle-strewn path as I make my way toward the remote northern quadrant, an area locals call the Whispering Pines. The name always struck me as oddly poetic for these pragmatic mountain folk. When I asked about it during my first weeks here, most shrugged it off. Just what folks have always called it, they'd say, eyes sliding away from mine. Only old Tom, who runs the general store 20 miles from the station, offered anything more. Those trees talk to each other, he'd said, leaning across the counter. His eyes, rheumy with age, had nevertheless held mine with surprising intensity. And sometimes they talk to people too. Best not to listen too hard. I'd laughed then. Now, for miles into my patrol and deep within the heart of those same pines, I'm not so sure I should have, because I can hear them, not in any way I could explain to another living soul. Not voices exactly, more like awareness, a rustling consciousness that seems to follow my movements, tracking me through the underbrush. The wind through the needles creates a constant sibilant whisper that occasionally forms patterns too coherent to be random. I stop to check my map, orienting myself against a rocky outcropping that serves as a natural landmark. The whispering stops abruptly, leaving a silence so profound my ears ring with it. Then, slowly, it begins again, closer now, surrounding me. Get a grip, I mutter, my voice sounding thin and insignificant against the vastness of the forest. I've never been prone to flights of fancy. There's a logical explanation. Wind patterns through the densely packed trees, perhaps, or my own isolation causing my mind to find patterns where none exist. I continue my patrol, checking several backcountry campsites for signs of illegal camping or fire hazards. At the third site, something catches my eye. A small cairn of stones, carefully balanced beside the cleared fire ring. Rangers discourage visitors from building these. They disrupt the natural environment and can confuse trail markers. I crouch down to dismantle it. The stones are warm to the touch despite the cool air. 7 smooth river rocks, stacked largest to smallest, topped with a small piece of what looks like obsidian. It gleams wetly in the dappled sunlight, its surface unnaturally reflective. Looking closer, I realize it's not obsidian at all, but something else. Something that seems to swallow the light rather than reflect it. My radio crackles suddenly, making me jump. Static fills the air. Then a voice breaks through, distorted and faint. Repeat. Any rangers in the North Quadrant, please respond. We have a report of a missing hiker near Whispering Pines. Last seen 3 days ago at Palmer's Creek Crossing. Over. I grab my radio. This is Ranger Sullivan. I'm about 4 miles north of Palmer's Creek. Can provide details on the missing person? Over. More static. Then, male, mid-30s solo hiker. Name Martin Kelly. 5'11", brown hair. Carrying a red backpack. Planned a 5-day loop, but didn't check in with his emergency contact. Over. Copy that. I'll keep an eye out and head toward Palmer's Creek. Over. Be advised. Sullivan, storm system moving in faster than predicted. Recommend you complete search grid and return to station before nightfall. Over. I glance at the sky. Through gaps in the canopy, I can see clouds gathering, darker and more ominous than this morning's forecast suggested. The air has changed too. There's a metallic taste to it, like copper pennies. Copy that. Sullivan out. I pocket my radio and take one last look at the strange cairn. Something about it unsettles me deeply. Without quite knowing why, I decide to leave it intact. Some instinct warns me against disturbing it further. Instead, I photograph it with my phone, no signal out here of course, but the camera still works, and mark the location on my map. As I turn to leave, I notice something I missed before. A thin line of red. Paint? Blood? Circling the campsite just inside the tree line. It forms a perfect circle around the clearing, disappearing into the underbrush in places but maintaining its unbroken circuit. I kneel to examine it. The substance is dry but relatively fresh, dark crimson against the brown earth. Not paint. My stomach turns slightly. The whispers from the trees intensify, and for a moment, just a brief, impossible moment, I think I hear my name carried on the wind. Palmer's Creek lies at the bottom of a steep ravine, its waters running fast with recent rainfall. The crossing consists of a series of large stepping stones, slick with spray and autumn dampness. I scan the area methodically, looking for any sign of Martin Kelly. The clouds have continued to gather overhead, casting the forest in premature twilight. The temperature has dropped at least 10 degrees since I started my patrol. On the far bank, something catches my eye, a flash of red against the deep green of the pines. I cross carefully, boots finding purchase on the slippery stones, the rush of water drowning out all other sounds. On the other side, I push through a tangle of brush toward the color I spotted. It's a backpack half concealed under a fallen log. Red, just like the missing hikers. I pull on latex gloves before examining it. The pack is in good condition, no tears or signs of animal interference. Inside, I find typical hiking gear. A hydration bladder still half full of water, trail mix, a first aid kit, compass, map, spare clothing. The sleeping bag and tent that would complete a solo hiker's kit are missing. I key my radio. Base, this is Sullivan. I've located what appears to be Kelly's backpack near Palmer's Creek Crossing. No sign of the hiker himself. Over. The radio hisses with static, but no response comes through. I try again, adjusting the frequency slightly. Nothing but white noise punctuated by strange, rhythmic clicking. A sudden gust of wind tears through the trees above me, setting the pines to swaying. Their whispers grow to a roar, and again, impossibly, unmistakably, I hear my name formed within that chaotic symphony. Sullivan, come see. We found him. I shake my head violently, dispelling the voice I can't possibly be hearing. Lack of sleep, the pressure of the approaching storm, concern for the missing hiker. My mind is playing tricks. I secure the backpack to my own pack and begin searching the area in expanding circles, marking my path with biodegradable tape to ensure I don't miss any ground. After 20 minutes, I find a trail leading away from the creek. Not a designated hiking path, but signs of recent passage. Broken twigs, displaced leaves, a thread caught on a thorny bush that matches the color of a jacket I saw in Kelly's pack. The trail leads uphill, away from the water, into a section of forest I've never patrolled before. The map shows nothing of significance in this direction. It should be more of the same, pine forest climbing gradually toward the ridgeline. But as I follow the signs of Kelly's passage, the character of the woods begins to change subtly. The pines grow closer together, their trunks twisted into unnatural shapes. The underbrush thins, then disappears altogether, leaving a floor carpeted with needles so thick they muffle my footsteps completely. The silence is absolute. No birdsong, no skittering of small animals, not even the sound of wind through the branches, though I can see the trees swaying above me. Just silence, and the soft rush of blood in my ears. I check my watch. 3:47 p.m. The storm will hit within hours, and daylight is already fading. I should turn back, report my findings, and organize a proper search party for tomorrow. That would be protocol. That would be safe. But something pulls me forward. Curiosity, concern for the missing hiker, or perhaps something else, something I can't name, a compulsion that feels both foreign and irresistible. The trail widens suddenly, opening into a clearing I swear doesn't appear on any forestry map I've studied. At its center stands a pine larger than any I've seen in Clearwater. Its trunk must be 12 feet in diameter, its lowest branches starting at least 50 feet up. The bark is not the reddish-brown of the surrounding trees, but almost black, deeply furrowed like ancient skin. Around the base of this massive tree, 7 cairns identical to the one I found earlier form a perfect circle. The same river stones, the same black, not quite obsidian capstones. And connecting them, a line of dark crimson traced through the pine needles. My breath catches in my throat. The air here feels different, heavier, charged with something I can't identify. My training tells me to document, photograph, report, but my instincts scream danger. As I stand frozen at the edge of the clearing, the whispering begins again, not from all around now, but from a single source, from the tree. Low at first, then building to a sound like thousands of voices murmuring just below the threshold of comprehension. Except for my name, that comes through clearly. Sullivan, you're here, at last. A dark shape moves on the far side of the clearing. A man steps out from behind the massive trunk. Even from this distance, I can tell something is wrong with the way he moves. Jerky, uncoordinated like a puppet on tangled strings. Hello, I call, one hand moving instinctively to the weapon at my hip. Sir, are you Martin Kelly? The figure stops. Slowly, it turns toward me. The face is human but wrong somehow, the features slightly misaligned, the skin too tight across the cheekbones. The eyes reflect the fading light like an animal's. Kelly, the figure says, its voice a rough approximation of human speech. Yes, Martin Kelly. Help me. It takes a step toward me, arms hanging awkwardly at its sides. Something dark drips from its fingertips, pattering onto the pine needles below. Stay where you are, sir. I command, my voice steadier than I feel. Are you injured?
I'm Ranger Sullivan.
I'm here to help you back to safety. The thing that is not quite Martin Kelly cocks its head at an impossible angle, regarding me with those reflective eyes. Sullivan, it says, and a smile splits its face too wide, revealing teeth that seem too numerous, too sharp. The trees told us you would come. My radio bursts to life with a squeal of feedback so intense I nearly drop it. Through the static, a voice, my supervisor's, comes through in broken fragments. Sullivan, get out. Immediately, not what seems. The figure takes another step forward. Behind it, I notice now the massive tree's bark has split, revealing a hollow large enough for a man to enter. Something glistens wetly within that cavity, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. The trees have been waiting. Not, Kelly says, its voice changing, deepening, multiplying into a chorus of whispers. They're so hungry, Sullivan. They've been patient. But now you're here. It moves with sudden, terrifying speed, covering half the clearing in a lurching bound. I draw my weapon, pointing it squarely at the center of its chest. Stop right there, I shout. Don't come any closer. It pauses, tilting its head again, studying me with curious detachment. "You won't need that here," it says, gesturing at my gun. "The trees don't fear your metal and powder. They've consumed things far more dangerous than you." The whispers from the great tree rise to a fever pitch, and I realize with dawning horror that I can understand them now. Dozens, hundreds of voices, some pleading, some raging, some weeping. And beneath them all, a deeper consciousness, ancient and patient and utterly inhuman. Join us, Sullivan. Become part of something greater. Your voice added to our chorus. The sky above has darkened completely, though whether from the approaching storm or something else, I can't tell. The air crackles with electricity, raising the hair on my arms. The circle of cairns begins to glow faintly, the strange black stones at their tops pulsing in unison with whatever lies within the tree. Not Kelly smiles again, wider this time, its jaw dislocating to accommodate the expression. "They've been watching you, learning you. They know you're alone. No family searching, no loved ones waiting. Perfect." It gestures behind itself, toward the hollow in the tree. "We saved a place for you, right next to me." My finger tightens on the trigger. "What are you?" It laughs, a sound like branches breaking in winter. "Not what, Ranger Sullivan." "Who?" "I am everyone who wandered too deep, everyone who heard the whispering and followed, everyone the forest has taken." It lunges. I fire twice, the reports deafeningly loud in the unnatural silence of the clearing. Not Kelly staggers back, 2 holes punched neatly through its chest. But there's no blood, only a dark, sap-like substance that oozes slowly from the wounds. It looks down at the damage with mild curiosity, then back at me, its smile never wavering. "The trees sustain us, Sullivan. They preserve us. You can't kill what's already been transformed." Behind Not Kelly, the hollow in the tree pulses faster, the sickly light growing brighter. The whispers rise to a deafening roar, and I feel something pushing against my consciousness. An alien will, vast and cold and infinitely patient, trying to subsume my own. Every instinct screams at me to run, to flee this place and never return. But my legs won't respond. My body feels rooted to the spot, as fixed and immovable as the pines themselves. Not Kelly approaches slowly now, confidence in every movement. It reaches out one hand, fingers elongated and wooden, bark-like texture replacing skin. "Don't fight it," it says almost gently. "It's peaceful, becoming part of the forest. Your consciousness expands. You'll see things no human was meant to understand. Isn't that why you came to Clearwater? To find something larger than yourself?" The pressure in my mind increases, images flooding through me. The forest seen from impossible perspectives, through countless eyes over uncounted years. Hikers, rangers, indigenous peoples, explorers, all walking beneath these same trees, all hearing the whispers, all finding their way to this clearing, to the great black pine, all becoming part of it. With monumental effort, I raise my gun again. Not at Not Kelly this time, but at the nearest cairn. I fire, shattering the stones, sending the black capstone spinning into the underbrush. A shriek tears through the clearing. Not human, not animal, but something vast and ancient and enraged. The pressure in my mind recedes slightly. I fire again, taking down a second cairn. Not Kelly's face contorts with fury. It rushes me, fingers hardening into wooden talons. I dive aside, rolling across the needle-strewn ground, coming up in a crouch to fire at a third cairn. Stone fragments explode outward. The whispers turn to screams. The great black pine shudders as if in pain, its branches thrashing against the darkened sky. Lightning flashes overhead, illuminating the clearing in stark, blue-white brilliance. In that flash, I see the truth of the hollow. Not just one body fused partially into the wood, but dozens. Faces press outward from the trunk, mouths open in silent screams, arms and legs partially absorbed into the living wood. Some are recent, still recognizably human. Others have been there so long they've become almost indistinguishable from the bark that envelopes them. I destroy another cairn, then another. With each one, the pressure in my mind lessens. Not Kelly writhes on the ground now, its form losing cohesion, the approximation of humanity slipping away to reveal something more vegetable than animal. "You don't understand," it gasps, its voice splintering into multiple tones. "They're the only thing keeping this place sealed. The cairns, the circle. Without them," I fire my last shot, destroying the sixth cairn. Only one remains. Not Kelly drags itself toward me, leaving a trail of dark ichor, its body twisting and reshaping with each movement. "Please," it begs, and for an instant, I hear only Martin Kelly, the man, not the thing the forest made of him. "If you break the last one, whatever they've been containing," the great pine shudders again, more violently this time. Deep within its trunk, something shifts. The hollow widens, those trapped inside moving with new urgency, pushing outward. The bark splits further, revealing not heartwood within, but a darkness deeper than night, a void that seems to swallow light itself. My weapon is empty. I look around desperately for something to use against the final cairn. Lightning flashes again, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The storm has arrived. Rain begins to fall, hissing as it hits the ground around the cairns, steam rising where droplets touch the circle of blood. Not Kelly has reached my feet, one wooden hand closing around my ankle with surprising strength. "You have to run," it says, its face reforming briefly into a desperate, human expression. Before it, whatever warning it meant to give is lost as the final cairn explodes without my intervention. The black capstone shattering into dust that hangs suspended in the air for one impossible moment before swirling away into the void now yawning open within the great pine. Not Kelly screams, a sound of pure anguish, as its body begins to dissolve, drawn inexorably toward that darkness. All around the clearing, the earth heaves and buckles. The circle of blood ignites, blue flames racing around its circumference, trapping me inside. From the void within the tree, something emerges, a tendril of absolute darkness, moving with deliberate, intelligent purpose. Where it touches the ground, all life withers instantly. Pine needles blacken and curl, insects dropping dead in its wake. It pauses, sensing the air, then turns unerringly toward me. My radio crackles to life one final time. Through waves of static, my supervisor's voice comes through with unexpected clarity. "Run, Sullivan. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just run." I run. They found me 3 days later, half dead from exposure and dehydration, 20 miles from where I should have been. My uniform was in tatters, my boots worn through, my skin lacerated by countless branches and thorns. I had no memory of how I traveled so far, so quickly, or what I was running from. My story made no sense to the search team. There is no clearing with a giant black pine in Clearwater Wilderness. There is no area known as the Whispering Pines on any official map. The coordinates I'd marked for the backpack led them to an empty stretch of creek bank. Martin Kelly, they informed me gently, had been found dead from an apparent heart attack at his campsite, 10 miles south of where I claimed to have seen him. They attributed my experience to hypothermia and shock, perhaps triggered by a fall I couldn't remember. The photographs on my phone showed nothing but blurry darkness. The journal entries I was certain I'd made documenting the strange cairn were absent from my logbook. I requested a transfer the day I was released from the hospital. It was granted with surprising speed and minimal questions. My supervisor wouldn't meet my eyes as he processed the paperwork. "Some folks aren't suited for Clearwater," was all he said. "Nothing to be ashamed of. I've been stationed at Bright River National Park for 2 months now. The forests here are younger, friendlier somehow, the trails well-marked and frequently traveled. I tell myself what happened at Clearwater was some kind of breakdown. Stress, isolation, perhaps an undiagnosed medical condition. But sometimes, when the wind blows through the pines at night, I hear whispers. And sometimes those whispers sound like my name. Yesterday, I found a small stack of stones at the edge of my patrol route. 7 smooth river rocks, piled largest to smallest. No obsidian this time, just an empty space where a capstone should be. Waiting, I destroyed the cairn immediately, scattering the stones as far apart as I could manage. I reported nothing. Who would believe me? But this morning there was another, closer to my cabin, and pinned beneath the bottom stone, a pine needle unlike any that grow in Bright River, darkly iridescent, smelling of copper and decay. The transfer request on my desk is already filled out, but a nagging doubt plagues me. Will running again make any difference? How far would I need to go to escape the reach of those ancient, patient trees? And the whispers, growing stronger each night, tell me I already know the answer. Nowhere is far enough, Sullivan. We're waiting. We saved a place for you. The first snow of the season always transforms Blackwater Ridge. I've been a ranger at this remote outpost for 3 years now, but that initial blanket of white still takes my breath away. How it smooths the jagged edges of our wilderness, muffles sound, and makes the vast forest feel even more isolated than it already is. Today's patrol route took me along the northeastern boundary, where the ridge descends into what locals call the Hollow, a deep, mist-filled valley that rarely sees direct sunlight even in summer. In winter, it's perpetually shrouded. The Forest Service radio crackled as I adjusted my pack. The weight of extra supplies a necessary precaution for the longer patrol. Sierra Station to Ranger Ellis. Check-in confirmed. Weather system moving in faster than expected. Consider shortening your route today. I pressed the talk button, my breath visible in the crisp morning air. Copy that, Sierra. I'll keep an eye on conditions. In truth, I had no intention of cutting my patrol short. The Hollow needed checking, especially with the strange incident reports that had been filtering in over the past month. 3 separate hiking groups had reported equipment malfunctions in the area. Compasses spinning wildly, GPS devices showing impossible coordinates, batteries draining within minutes. Typical electromagnetic anomalies that occur in certain mineral-rich areas, according to my supervisor. Nothing worth investigating further. But there was something else, something officially unmentioned in the reports that Ranger Mackenzie had told me over coffee last week. Each group, independently of one another, reported hearing what they described as voices echoing without source. Whispers that seemed to follow them through the densest parts of the forest. I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks, or perhaps the psychological effect of being in such an isolated area. The human mind craves patterns, seeks meaning where there is none. I know this. I've seen people break down after just a few days alone in the wilderness. The trail narrowed as I descended into the hollow, ancient pines towering overhead, their needles dusting the fresh snow with spots of green and brown. My boots crunched rhythmically, the only sound besides the occasional call of a distant raven. No wind today, which was unusual for early December. The stillness felt unnatural, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. 2 hours into my patrol, I reached the first waypoint, a small clearing where the river carved through the valley floor. I marked it in my logbook, noting the lower-than-average water level and the unusual absence of animal tracks along the bank. Typically, this spot would show evidence of deer, elk, maybe even the occasional bear. Today, nothing disturbed the pristine snow except my own footprints. I snapped a few photos for the ecological survey before continuing east, where the terrain grew more challenging. The pines gave way to gnarled, ancient oaks whose twisted branches seemed to reach for me as I passed. Their shadows stretched impossibly long across the snow despite the weak winter sun barely penetrating the cloud cover. It was nearing midday when I first noticed the silence. Not just quietness, but a complete absence of sound, as if I'd suddenly gone deaf.
No birds.
No rustling leaves. Not even the sound of my own footsteps reached my ears for several seconds. I stopped, heartbeat quickening, and swallowed hard to pop my ears. Sound rushed back, but different now, hollow somehow, like I was hearing everything through water. And then I heard it, what the hikers must have been talking about. Not voices exactly, but something approximating human speech, rising and falling in pitch, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line, my hand instinctively moving to the bare spray at my belt. Hello! My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat and lifeless. The whispers stopped abruptly. I stood motionless for nearly a minute, straining to hear anything beyond my own breathing. Nothing. I made a note in my logbook with trembling hands. Acoustic anomaly in lower hollow, possibly wind through rock formations? I continued my patrol, but with heightened awareness, cataloging every sound, every movement in my peripheral vision. The forest felt different now, watching rather than simply existing around me. The pleasant solitude of the morning had curdled into something oppressive. At the second waypoint, an old fire lookout that hadn't been used in decades, I found the first physical anomaly. The wooden structure should have been empty, its windows boarded since the 90s when budget cuts closed this outpost. But the door hung open, swinging gently though there was no breeze. Department protocol dictated I investigate possible break-ins or squatters. I approached cautiously, announcing my presence. Forest Service. Anyone inside? The lookout's interior was a single room, raised on stilts about 15 feet off the ground to provide a clear view above the treeline. The stairs creaked under my weight as I ascended, flashlight in one hand, bear spray in the other. The door groaned as I pushed it fully open. Empty. No signs of recent human presence. No footprints in the dust that coated the floor. No disturbed cobwebs in the corners. The place looked exactly as it should after 30 years of abandonment, except for one detail that sent ice through my veins. In the center of the room stood a single wooden chair, facing the boarded window. On its seat lay a Forest Service logbook identical to the one in my pack, but older, its cover faded and corners worn smooth. I should not have touched it. Every instinct told me to leave it alone, to back out of that lookout and radio for assistance. Instead, I picked it up. The pages were filled with daily patrol notes spanning the winter of 1976, the handwriting increasingly erratic as the entries progressed. The Ranger D. Sullivan, according to the front page, detailed routine observations at first, weather conditions, wildlife sightings, trail maintenance needs. But by late January, the entries grew disturbing. January 24th, 1976, second day without animal sightings. Hollow completely silent. Radio picks up only static despite clear conditions. Will attempt repair tomorrow. January 27th, 1976, voices in the hollow again today. Followed protocol and investigated. Found nothing. Equipment continues to malfunction. Compass useless. January 30th, 1976, snow fell upward this morning. Watched it rise from the ground to the sky for 6 minutes before reality corrected itself. Not including this in official report. The entries continued, documenting increasingly impossible phenomena. Shadows moving independently of their casters, trees that weren't there the day before, sounds of footsteps in freshly fallen snow that stopped at solid rock walls. The final entry was dated February 12th, 1976. They're getting closer. I can see them now, standing between the trees. They look almost human, but wrong somehow, too tall, joints bending in impossible ways. They don't move when I watch them directly. I'm not leaving the lookout anymore. If anyone finds this, the hollow isn't what we thought. It's a door, and something has noticed it's unlocked. The last page contained a crude map with a location marked in red ink. A spot approximately 2 miles east of the lookout, deep in the most inaccessible part of the hollow. Next to the mark were the words "IT opens here" underlined 3 times. I closed the logbook with shaking hands and shoved it into my pack. The rational part of my mind supplied reasonable explanations. This was an elaborate prank by seasonal staff, or perhaps materials from a horror film project someone had shot here without permits. The alternative, that Ranger Sullivan had actually experienced these things, was impossible to accept. I descended from the lookout and checked my watch. 2:17 p.m. Plenty of daylight left, but the sky had darkened considerably since I'd entered the structure. The storm was moving in faster than predicted. I should head back. Instead, I found myself pulling out my topographic map and tracing a route to the location marked in Sullivan's book. 2 miles east meant crossing a ravine and climbing to a plateau that, according to my current map, featured nothing of note. No geological formations, no historical sites, nothing that would warrant special attention. Sierra Station to Ranger Ellis. Do you copy? Storm warning upgraded. Return to station immediately. I reached for my radio to acknowledge, but stopped. Something was interfering with the transmission. Beneath the ranger's voice, I could hear what sounded like dozens of whispered voices, speaking not in unison but in a disorienting cascade of overlapping words. I tried to respond, "Ellis to Sierra." Message received. Heading. The radio emitted a high-pitched whine that made me drop it into the snow. When I picked it up again, the screen was black, battery completely drained despite being fully charged this morning. The logical decision was clear: head back immediately. The storm, the radio failure, the approaching darkness, everything pointed to retreat. I even took 3 steps in the western direction before stopping. The whispers had returned, louder now, and with my radio dead, I knew they weren't transmission interference. They seemed to emanate from the direction marked on Sullivan's map, carrying through the still air with unnatural clarity. I wish I could explain why I turned east instead of west. Professional curiosity, a sense of duty to investigate what might be someone in distress, or was it something else? Something drawing me forward against my better judgment? The terrain grew steeper, more challenging as I pushed deeper into the hollow than my patrol route had ever taken me. The trees here were older, massive ancient sentinels with trunks wider than my arm span. The snow beneath them was undisturbed, as if nothing had passed this way in years, perhaps decades. As I climbed over a fallen log, my boot caught on something half-buried in the snow. Brushing away the white powder revealed a camera. Not a modern digital one, but an old 35mm model from the 70s or early 80s. The brand name had worn away, but it seemed intact, sealed against the elements. Another item for the lost and found, I thought, securing it to my pack. The whispers grew more distinct as I approached the coordinates, occasionally resolving into words I could almost understand before dissolving back into meaningless phonemes. The forest had grown darker still, though my watch insisted it was only 3:24 p.m. The storm clouds overhead had thickened to an unnatural degree, blocking almost all sunlight. I switched on my flashlight as I climbed the last ridge before the plateau. According to Sullivan's map, I was less than a quarter mile from the marked location. My breath came in short, visible puffs as I pushed through dense underbrush that tore at my uniform. When I reached the plateau, I immediately understood why Sullivan had marked this location. The trees formed a perfect circle about 50 feet in diameter around a small clearing. Not a natural formation, trees don't grow in perfect geometric patterns, but there were no stumps, no signs of human clearing. It was as if the forest had intentionally left this space empty. In the center of the clearing stood a stone structure, not large, perhaps 4 feet high and equally wide, shaped like a crude doorway or arch. The stone was dark, almost black, with veins of some crystalline material running through it that caught and reflected my flashlight beam in disorienting ways. Snow covered the ground everywhere except within the arch itself. A perfect rectangle of bare earth remained exposed, unfrozen despite the temperatures. I approached slowly, the whispers now a constant stream around me, still indecipherable but undeniably communicative in their patterns. I should have documented the site properly, taken photographs, GPS coordinates, samples of the stone. Instead, I found myself standing before the arch, flashlight beam playing across its surface, revealing symbols carved into the stone that seemed to shift when viewed directly. The whispers reached a crescendo as I unconsciously raised my hand toward the space within the arch. The air there appeared darker somehow, a deepness beyond absence of light. My fingers were inches from crossing that threshold when my flashlight flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, I became aware of movement within the clearing. Not just around me, but above me. I craned my neck upward, eyes adjusting to the gloom, and saw them. Figures stood at the edge of the tree line, just as Sullivan had described, almost human but fundamentally wrong. Too tall, too thin, joints connecting at impossible angles. In the poor light, I couldn't make out features, only elongated silhouettes that remained perfectly still as long as I looked directly at them. When my eyes darted away, I caught the suggestion of movement in my peripheral vision. A slight tilt of a misshapen head, the impossible bend of a limb. The whispering stopped. Complete silence descended upon the clearing, heavy and expectant. My hand, still extended toward the arch, began to tremble. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my muscles had locked in place. I stood frozen, caught between terror and a strange, almost magnetic compulsion to touch the darkness within the stone doorway. A branch snapped somewhere in the forest beyond the clearing, a sharp crack that shattered the unnatural silence. The sound broke whatever hold the arch had on me, and I stumbled backward, nearly falling. The moment my attention broke from the figures, they moved, not walking or running, but shifting position instantaneously, now standing closer to the clearing's center. Their movements were staccato, jerky frames of animation rather than fluid motion. With each blink of my eyes, they advanced, covering impossible distances in the brief glimpses of darkness. I turned and ran, abandoning all ranger protocol and training. No orderly retreat, no careful backtracking of my route. Just blind panic driving me to crash through underbrush, slide down embankments, and splash through icy streams. I didn't stop to check my map or compass, operating on pure instinct and the desperate hope that downhill would eventually lead me out of the hollow. The storm had arrived in full force, snow falling so heavily that I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The wind howled through the trees. At least, I told myself it was the wind, though it carried those same whispering voices, now seemingly calling my name between gusts. I don't know how long I ran. My watch had stopped at 3:33 p.m., though the sky suggested hours had passed. My legs burned, lungs ached from the frigid air. Twice I fell heavily, the second time sliding down a steep slope and slamming into a tree trunk that knocked the wind from me. As I lay there, gasping for breath, I became aware of a rhythmic crunching sound approaching through the snow. Footsteps, but with an odd cadence, as if the stride length was too long, the rhythm slightly off. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain in my ribs, and pressed myself against the trunk of a massive pine. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped, perhaps 20 yards away. I held my breath, eyes straining to penetrate the curtain of falling snow. A beam of light cut through the storm, a flashlight, moving in a searching pattern through the trees. Relief flooded through me. "Hello," I called out, my voice hoarse. "Forest Service. I'm over here." The light immediately swung in my direction, momentarily blinding me. I raised a hand to shield my eyes. "Ellis? That you?" The voice belonged to Ranger Mackenzie. "Jesus, we've been looking for you for hours. Your GPS tracker went dead at the old lookout." I moved toward the light, snow crunching under my boots. "Mac, thank God. You won't believe what I found up there." As I drew closer, something made me hesitate. Mackenzie was standing oddly, his posture slightly askew, as if his spine bent at angles that shouldn't be possible. The flashlight illuminated his face from below, casting strange shadows that made his features look stretched, elongated. "Something wrong, Ellis?" he asked, head tilting at an angle just slightly too acute. "You look like you've seen something that scared you." I took an involuntary step backward. "Where's your radio, Mac? Your pack?" Mackenzie's smile widened a fraction too far, stretching literally from ear to ear. "I must have left them. When we heard you were missing, I was in such a rush to find you." "We? Who else is searching?" His head tilted further, now at an anatomically impossible angle. "Everyone's looking for you, Ellis. We're all so concerned." I backed away another step, then another. Mackenzie's form seemed to flicker in the snowfall, momentarily elongating before snapping back to human proportions. "Don't go, Ellis," he said, his voice now overlaid with that same whispering chorus I'd heard in the hollow. "I can show you the way out. Just follow me deeper into the trees. The doorway is waiting." I turned and ran again, no longer caring about direction, only distance from the thing wearing Mackenzie's appearance. The storm intensified, snow now falling so heavily that it was like running through a white wall. I could hear movement all around me, the crunching of snow, branches breaking, and always those whispers, growing louder, more insistent. I don't remember finding the service road. One moment I was plunging through dense forest, the next my boots hit cleared pavement. Headlights appeared through the snowfall, a Forest Service truck moving slowly along the road. I waved frantically, half convinced it would be another apparition, another trap. The truck stopped. The door opened, and Ranger Chun stepped out, genuine concern on her face. Ellis? Holy shit, we've been looking everywhere. Are you hurt? She approached cautiously, as if sensing my fear. What happened to you out there? I couldn't form words, could only look past her to the tree line where shapes seemed to waver just beyond clear sight. Chun followed my gaze but saw nothing, or at least, claimed to see nothing as she guided me to the passenger seat. As we drove away, I watched the side mirror. The storm appeared to stop abruptly at a distinct line about a quarter-mile behind us, as if confined to the area I'd just fled. In that final glimpse before we rounded a bend, I saw them. A line of impossibly tall figures standing at the forest edge, perfectly still, watching our departure. The official report cites my experience as hypothermia-induced hallucinations combined with spatial disorientation during an unexpected blizzard. My pack, containing Sullivan's logbook, was never recovered, despite multiple search attempts once the storm cleared. The camera I found had been damaged by moisture. The film, when developed, showed only strange light distortions that the lab technician attributed to chemical degradation. I've been transferred to the visitor center, no longer permitted solo patrols. They don't say it's a demotion, but we all know why I'm here, handing out maps and warning tourists to stay on marked trails. I tell myself it was the hypothermia, the isolation, the stress of being lost in a sudden storm. But some nights, I wake to the sound of whispers coming through my radio, though it's turned off. My compass needle spins randomly when I point it toward the hollow. And sometimes, when I look out my cabin window at night, I see impossibly tall figures standing motionless at the forest edge, their elongated limbs swaying slightly though there is no wind. I've requested all the personnel files from the 1970s. I need to know what happened to Ranger Sullivan after his final entry. But that's proven surprisingly difficult. Those records were apparently lost in a storage facility fire in 1983. Tomorrow I go back on limited patrol duty, the eastern boundary, nowhere near the hollow. Still, I've marked my map with the location of that stone arch, and I check it obsessively, irrationally afraid that the mark is slowly moving closer to the ranger station with each passing day. The first snow has melted. Spring is coming, bringing hikers and campers back to Blackwater Ridge. I should warn them. I should close the trails that lead into the hollow. But who would believe me? Sometimes I think I hear the arch calling me back. In my dreams, I see my hand reaching into that darkness, fingers almost touching whatever lies beyond. I wake before contact, always heart pounding, sheets soaked with sweat. But one day, I fear I won't wake up in time. One day, my fingers will breach that threshold. And whatever stands in that clearing with too many joints and elongated limbs will finally have what it's been waiting for. I wonder if that's what happened to Ranger Sullivan. I wonder if he's still out there, somewhere in the hollow. I wonder if I'll join him soon. The sound of my boots crunching through the frost-covered pine needles echoed in the pre-dawn stillness. My breath formed delicate clouds that dissipated into the darkness as I adjusted my pack and continued my trek along the eastern ridge of Blackwater State Forest. 6 years I'd been stationed here, and the early morning patrols still filled me with a quiet reverence. The radio at my hip crackled. Ranger Sullivan, check in. Over. I pressed the talk button. Sullivan here. Just passing marker 17 on the Elderwood Trail. All quiet. Over. Copy that. Remember to check the seismograph readings at the Old Fire Lookout. Scientists are requesting daily data after those minor tremors last week. Over. Will do. Should reach the lookout by 0900. Sullivan out. I clicked off the radio and gazed upward. The canopy was beginning to distinguish itself from the navy sky as dawn approached, revealing the massive cathedral of pines surrounding me. Blackwater wasn't one of those glamorous national parks that attracted tourists by the millions. It was remote, rugged, and largely untouched. Exactly why I'd requested the assignment after my stint at Yellowstone. The forest was waking up around me. A pair of ravens called harshly from somewhere to my right. A good sign. Ravens were intelligent enough to announce danger, and their casual conversation meant all was well. Still, something felt off this morning. Not wrong exactly, just different. The air seemed heavier, the shadows deeper than usual. I shook off the feeling. Rangers develop a sixth sense about their territories, and mine was likely responding to the changing weather. The forecast called for unusual temperature drops over the next few days. Climate change bringing Arctic air much farther south than typical. By the time I reached the old fire lookout, thin beams of sunlight pierced through the trees, illuminating patches of the forest floor in golden light. The lookout tower stood like a lonely sentinel, its weathered gray timber a stark contrast to the vibrant greens and browns of the surrounding forest. Built in the 1940s and decommissioned as a fire watch station in the early 2000s, it now served as a remote research outpost. I climbed the winding stairs, each step groaning under my weight. At the top, I unlocked the hatch and pulled myself into the observation room. The glass-enclosed space offered a 360-degree view of the wilderness, miles of undulating forest stretching to the hazy mountains in the distance. I never tired of this view. The seismograph sat in the corner, a surprisingly modern piece of equipment in this antiquated structure. I checked the paper readout, noting the jagged lines that indicated minor Earth movements. Nothing significant, but definitely more activity than we typically saw in this geologically stable region. I took photographs of the readout, reset the machine, and recorded the data in my logbook. As I was preparing to leave, something caught my eye. Through the eastern window, approximately 2 miles away, a section of the forest looked wrong. I raised my binoculars for a better look. The pines there seemed to be leaning slightly, as if drawn toward a central point. It wasn't dramatic enough to be immediately obvious, but once noticed, it was impossible to unsee. Like a subtle optical illusion. I checked my map. The area corresponded to a remote section we called the Hollows, a depression in the landscape characterized by limestone sinkholes and older growth forest. Not frequently patrolled due to its difficult terrain, but not restricted either. I made a quick decision. The seismograph readings coupled with this unusual forest configuration warranted investigation. I radioed headquarters. Base, this is Sullivan. I've completed the seismograph readings. Going to check out something unusual in the Hollow sector. Should be back on the main trail by 1400. Over. Copy, Sullivan. The Hollows is pretty remote. Make sure to check in hourly. Over. Will do. Sullivan out. I descended the tower and set out toward the Hollows, consulting my map occasionally as the trail grew faint and eventually disappeared altogether. The forest changed character as I walked. The trees grew older, their trunks wider, the undergrowth more sparse. The temperature seemed to drop with each step deeper into this section, though that could have been the increasing cloud cover blocking the morning sun. 2 hours of hiking brought me to the edge of the first sinkhole, a perfectly circular depression about 30 feet across and 15 feet deep. The limestone walls were sheer but crumbling in places. What caught my attention, however, was the unnatural silence. No birdsong, no rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth, not even the sound of the wind in the trees. As I stood at the edge, I noticed dark openings along the base of the sinkhole, small caves or perhaps drainage channels worn through the soft limestone. Something about their arrangement seemed deliberate, almost like doorways. I shook off the fanciful thought and carefully made my way down the sloped side of the depression. The soil was unusually cold beneath my gloved hands. At the bottom, I approached one of the openings, large enough for a person to crawl through if they were determined. A strange odor emanated from within, earthy but with an underlying chemical tang I couldn't identify. My flashlight revealed little beyond the first few feet of the tunnel, which appeared to curve downward sharply. I made notes in my field book and took photographs. I'd mention it to the geologists who occasionally consulted on the park's karst topography. As I prepared to climb out of the sinkhole, I noticed something half buried in the soil, a small object reflecting my flashlight beam. I carefully brushed away the dirt to reveal a camera. Not a modern digital device, but an older film camera, its once black casing now faded to gray with age and exposure. I turned it over in my hands. The brand was still visible, Canon, but the model appeared to be from the 1980s or early 90s. What caught my attention was the condition. Despite clearly having been exposed to the elements, possibly for years, there was no significant corrosion. Just a fine layer of the same grayish dirt that covered the ground. I opened the back. Surprisingly, a roll of film was still inside, partially exposed. I secured the camera in my pack, intending to turn it in to Lost and Found, though I doubted anyone would claim it after so long. Just as I was about to leave, I heard it. A sound so faint I might have imagined it. A rhythmic tapping, like a woodpecker but more regular, more deliberate, coming from deep within one of the tunnel openings.
Top, top, top.
Paused.
Top, top, top.
I froze, straining to hear above the sudden rush of blood in my ears.
Top, top, top.
Pause. Tap, tap, tap. This deep in the forest, miles from any trail, the sound couldn't be human-made. Perhaps water dripping onto a hollow space? But the regularity of it. I approached the opening cautiously, shining my light into the darkness. The beam disappeared into the void without illuminating anything of substance. "Hello," I called, immediately feeling foolish. Of course, no one was down there. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the mysterious sound. I waited, counting seconds in my head, until a full minute had passed. Nothing. I was about to back away when a cold draft emerged from the tunnel, carrying with it that same unidentifiable chemical smell, stronger now, and something else, a low sound just at the threshold of hearing. Not tapping this time, but a continuous hum or vibration that I felt more than heard, resonating in my chest cavity. My training and experience warred with a sudden, primal instinct to flee. I compromised by backing away slowly, maintaining visual contact with the opening while I retreated to the edge of the sinkhole. The vibration faded as I climbed out, and by the time I reached the forest floor above, both the sound and the unsettling smell had dissipated. I checked my watch, 1,324 hours. I was due to call in. "Base, this is Sullivan checking in from the hollows." "Over." Static answered me. I tried again, adjusting the frequency slightly. "Base, do you copy? This is Ranger Sullivan." "Over." More static, then a fragment of a response. "Hear you?" Breaking up. "Position. I'm at the eastern sinkhole cluster in the hollows heading back to the main trail now." "Over." "Danger of... stay away from... repeat. Do not." The transmission dissolved into crackling static and then silence. I checked the radio, the battery indicator showed full power. The hollows was remote but not usually outside radio range. Perhaps the limestone formations were interfering with the signal. I marked my location on the GPS and began the hike back, moving at a faster pace than my journey in. The forest seemed different now, the trees more closely spaced, the shadows deeper despite the midday hour. Twice I had to reconsult my map, certain I was on the correct bearing but somehow not recognizing the landscape. An hour later, I stopped to rest and check my position. According to the GPS, I was making good progress toward the main trail, but the terrain didn't match what should have been there. Instead of the gradual upslope leading to the ridge, I found myself descending into another depression. Worse, the trees here showed the same strange inward leaning I'd observed from the tower. I turned to retrace my steps and froze. 20 yards behind me, partially obscured by a large pine, stood a figure. My first thought was hiker, though this area was far from any marked trail. My second thought registered the wrongness. The figure was too tall, too still, and too thin to be human. It appeared to be wearing dark clothing that blended with the shadows. "Hello," I called, my hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on my belt. The figure didn't respond or move. I blinked, and when my eyes refocused, it was gone. A trick of the light, I told myself. Shadows playing against the trees and my mind filling in the rest. But a cold sweat had broken out across my back, and my heart hammered against my ribs. I continued walking, checking behind me every few paces. The GPS indicated I was heading in the right direction, but nothing looked familiar. Worse, I realized I was approaching another sinkhole, larger than the first, its edges less defined, more like a gradual bowl-shaped depression. At the bottom, partially submerged in a shallow pool of stagnant water, was a backpack. I approached cautiously, scanning the area for signs of its owner. The pack was modern, a North Face in faded red, caked with mud but otherwise intact. I called out several times, receiving only silence in response. Unzipping the main compartment revealed typical hiking gear: a water filter, first aid kit, energy bars, a map similar to mine but marked with handwritten notes, and a journal. The latter caught my attention, a weathered moleskine with a detailed log of daily hikes. The final entry was dated 3 months ago, day 4 in the hollows. The sinkholes are exactly where Dr. Kaufman's research suggested they would be, arranged in the pattern he identified from satellite imagery. I've taken soil samples from each location and recorded the temperature differentials. The locals refused to talk about this place. Rosie at the ranger station practically pushed me out the door when I mentioned coming here. Tomorrow I'll try to find the central chamber where the readings were strongest. My blood ran cold. We had no ranger named Rosie at our station. In fact, we hadn't had a female ranger in the 4 years since Linda Cho transferred to Olympic National Park. I flipped to the front cover, looking for identification. Property of Marcus Weldon, University of Michigan Geological Survey. I'd never heard the name, but I could check the visitor logs back at the station. I secured the journal in my pack alongside the camera and prepared to take the backpack as well. Lost hikers were rare in our park, but not unheard of. The journal entry concerned me. It suggested Marcus had ventured deeper into the hollows alone, possibly into the tunnel system I'd observed. As I gathered the pack, the radio at my hip suddenly screeched. A burst of static so loud I nearly dropped everything. Through the noise, I heard fragments of a transmission. "Sullivan, get out. Not what you think. There." The voice wasn't one I recognized from the ranger station. It cut off abruptly, replaced by that same low vibration I'd felt near the tunnel, now emanating from my radio, though the speaker wasn't designed to produce such low frequencies. I switched off the radio, but the vibration continued, now seeming to come from the ground beneath my feet. The stagnant pool at the center of the depression began to tremble, forming concentric ripples. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I scrambled up the side of the depression, abandoned backpack in hand, and started running in what I hoped was the direction of the trail. The forest blurred around me as I ran, heedless of the branches tearing at my clothes and skin. The heavy pack bounced against my back, but I didn't slow to adjust it. Something was very wrong in the hollows, and every instinct screamed at me to put distance between myself and those sinkholes. After several minutes of hard running, I had to stop, lungs burning. I leaned against a tree, gulping air, and tried to orient myself. The GPS showed I was moving in the right direction, but the device seemed to be malfunctioning, the position marker jumping erratically across the screen. As my breathing slowed, I became aware of the silence again. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind. Just my own ragged breath and pounding heart. And footsteps, not my own. These were coming from behind me, slow and deliberate. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I turned slowly. Nothing visible, but the sounds continued, growing closer. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I started walking again, faster now but not running, trying to move quietly while straining to hear over my own footfalls. The other steps matched my pace exactly, always the same distance behind me. The terrain began to slope upward. I was finally ascending toward the ridge and the main trail. My spirits lifted slightly at the familiar landscape ahead. Just another hour and I'd be back in radio range, able to call for assistance. The footsteps behind me stopped. I paused, turning slowly in a complete circle, scanning the forest. Nothing moved except the occasional branch swaying in a breeze I couldn't feel. That's when I noticed the trees. Every trunk within my field of vision was marked with the same symbol, a simple circle with a diagonal line through it, carved deeply into the bark at roughly eye level. The carvings looked fresh, the exposed inner with still light in color rather than weathered gray. My mouth went dry. These markings hadn't been here when I passed through this morning. I was certain of it. A branch snapped loudly to my left. I whirled toward the sound, hand going to my bear spray. 20 yards away stood the figure I'd glimpsed earlier, tall, unnaturally thin, and now clearly visible in the afternoon light. It was human-shaped but wrong in proportions, limbs too long, torso too narrow. It wore what appeared to be a standard issue park ranger uniform, but faded to an impossible degree, the green fabric now almost gray. Where the face should have been was only shadow, too dark even in the daylight. "Who are you?" I called, my voice steadier than I expected. The figure tilted its head, an unsettlingly bird-like motion. When it spoke, the voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Ranger Sullivan, you're outside your patrol zone." The voice was flat, emotionless, yet disturbingly familiar, an uncanny echo of my own. "How do you know my name?" I demanded, thumb poised over the bear spray trigger. "We know all the Rangers." Took a step forward. "We were Rangers once." Another step. I could now see that what I had taken for shadow wasn't absence of light. Its face was covered in a layer of the same gray soil I'd found in the sinkhole. "What happened to Marcus Weldon?" I asked, nodding toward the backpack still clutched in my left hand. The figure stopped. "He found what he was looking for, as will you if you continue along this path." "What does that mean?" Rather than answer, it raised an arm and pointed behind me. Against every instinct for survival, I turned to look. The forest had changed again. Where moments before there had been an upward slope leading to the ridge, there was now another depression, the largest yet. At its center was not a pool but a perfectly circular opening in the earth, perhaps 10 feet in diameter. Even from this distance, I could see steam or mist rising from the hole. When I turned back, the figure was gone. I stood frozen, mind racing through increasingly implausible explanations. Sleep deprivation, hallucinogenic spores, gas leaks from the limestone caverns. None accounted for what I was experiencing. The vibration started again, stronger this time, making the ground beneath my feet tremble slightly. It was coming from the direction of the hole. I had to make a decision. Continuing forward meant approaching that ominous opening. Going back meant potentially encountering the figure again, or worse, becoming more lost in this suddenly unfamiliar forest. I chose forward, but with caution, moving slowly and stopping frequently to listen and observe. As I approached the edge of the depression, the vibration intensified, becoming a physical sensation that resonated in my chest cavity and made my teeth ache. The hole was even more unsettling up close. The edges were too perfect, the sides too smooth to be natural. The mist rising from its depths carried that same chemical odor I'd noticed earlier, but stronger now, making my eyes water and my throat constrict. I stood at the rim, shining my flashlight downward. The beam disappeared into the mist without illuminating anything below. The vibration was almost unbearable this close, rattling my vision and making it difficult to think clearly. From deep within the hole came the tapping sound again. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. As if in response, my radio crackled to life, though I hadn't turned it back on. "Sullivan." The voice was clearer now, but still unfamiliar. "The camera. Look at the camera." I remembered the old Canon I'd found earlier. With trembling hands, I retrieved it from my pack and examined it more closely. What I had taken for dirt encrusting the device wasn't soil at all, but the same gray substance that had covered the face of the figure, fine, almost powdery, yet somehow oily to the touch. The back of the camera had a small window showing the film canister, with a label still partially visible. Not the name of a film brand as I would have expected, but a sequence of letters and numbers, SCP-5871. The radio spoke again. It's been trying to reach the surface for decades. The Foundation contained it in 1967, but the barrier is failing. The hollows are expanding. You need to. The transmission cut off in a burst of static. From the depths of the hole, something answered. Not the tapping this time, but a low, mournful tone, like wind through a massive pipe. The sound grew louder, transforming into what I can only describe as a voice, though it formed no words I could understand. The ground began to shake violently. I stumbled back from the edge as cracks appeared in the soil around the hole, radiating outward like a spider's web. The mist erupted upward in a geyser of gray, carrying with it a stench so foul I retched immediately. Through streaming eyes, I saw something rising from the depths. A massive shape, indistinct through the mist but unmistakably alive in its movements. It unfurled with agonizing slowness, extending upward and outward like a time-lapse of a blooming flower. But there was nothing beautiful about this emergence. My paralysis broke. I turned and ran, no longer caring about direction, interested only in putting distance between myself and that abomination. The forest blurred around me, trees seeming to bend inward as I passed, branches reaching like grasping hands. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost meaning in the terrible sameness of the forest. My lungs burned, my legs threatened to buckle, but still I pushed forward, driven by the certainty that to stop was to die, or worse. When I finally collapsed, unable to run another step, I found myself at the base of a familiar landmark, Dragon's Tooth, a distinctive rock formation less than a mile from the main trail. Somehow, through blind panic and random flight, I had navigated back towards safety. My radio crackled again. This time, I recognized the voice of Terry, our dispatch officer. "Sullivan, come in. We've been trying to reach you for hours." Over. With shaking hands, I raised the radio. "This is Sullivan. I'm at Dragon's Tooth. Something's happening in the hollows. I need extraction and containment teams." Over. "Sullivan, thank God. Stay where you are. Ranger Patel is less than 20 minutes from your position." "What kind of containment? Wildlife?"
Toxic spill.
Over. How could I possibly explain what I'd seen? Unknown entity and possible geological instability. The sinkholes are expanding and there's something coming out of them. Not animal, not human. I found evidence of a missing researcher named Marcus Weldon and... "Did you say Weldon?" Terry's voice had changed, all professional distance gone. "Marcus Weldon disappeared in 1992, Sullivan. His backpack was never recovered. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. That's impossible. The journal entry was dated 3 months ago. Stay where you are, Sullivan. Do not move. Patel and a medical team are en route." I lowered the radio, mind reeling. If Weldon had disappeared 33 years ago, how could his equipment look relatively intact? And if the journal entry was truly from 1992, why did it mention satellite imagery that wouldn't have been commonly available then? I slumped against the base of Dragon's Tooth, exhaustion finally overcoming adrenaline. As I waited for rescue, I removed the camera from my pack one last time, turning it over in my hands. The gray substance seemed to have spread, now covering most of the exterior. The film window that had shown SCP-5871 was now obscured completely. On impulse, I tried to open the back again, to remove the film before turning the camera over to whatever authorities would inevitably become involved. The latch wouldn't budge. More disturbingly, the seam where the back panel met the body of the camera seemed to have disappeared, as if the two pieces had fused into one. Just as I heard the approaching calls of Ranger Patel and her team, I noticed one final detail. A tiny symbol etched into the base of the camera, previously hidden by dirt but now clearly visible. A circle with a diagonal line through it, the same mark I'd seen carved into the trees. The official investigation concluded that I had experienced severe disorientation due to exposure to methane gas leaking from the limestone caverns. My account of the entity in ranger uniform, the expanding sinkholes, and the thing emerging from the central pit were attributed to hallucinations caused by the gas. The camera and backpack were catalogued as evidence in the long-cold Weldon disappearance case, though I was not permitted to see them again after they were taken for further analysis. 3 days after my rescue, I requested a transfer to another park. It was granted with surprising speed and without question. I've been at Rocky Mountain National Park for 6 months now. The clean mountain air and open vistas are a welcome change from the claustrophobic forests of Blackwater. Yet sometimes, when I'm alone on patrol, I feel a familiar vibration through the soles of my boots, a rhythmic pulse from deep within the earth. And last week, I found the first marking. A circle with a diagonal line through it, freshly carved into a ponderosa pine along my regular patrol route. I haven't reported it. Who would believe me? Instead, I've started my own journal, recording everything I can remember about the hollows and what I found there. Because the thing beneath the sinkholes isn't contained anymore. It's spreading, and I think it's following me. The radio static broke my morning routine. Just 3 short bursts followed by silence. I waited for dispatch to resume, but nothing came through. Not unusual this deep in Blackwood National Forest. The mountains played havoc with our communications, especially in the northern quadrant where I'd been stationed for the past 11 months. I tapped the receiver once, twice. Ranger Sullivan here. Come again. Nothing but the soft hiss of white noise. I made a note to check the relay station during my patrol. Probably just another power fluctuation from last night's storm. April in Blackwood brought unpredictable weather. While the lower elevations were already experiencing spring's thaw, up here at 7,000 feet, winter held on with stubborn fingers. Yesterday's sudden downpour had given way to snow overnight, leaving 3 fresh inches across my cabin's porch. The forest beyond was transformed. Every pine branch laden with white, the morning light refracting into countless pinpricks of brilliance that hurt my eyes. My watch read 6:43 a.m. The patrol route would take longer today with the fresh snow. I pulled on my parka, fastened my utility belt with its standard issue gear, flashlight, multi-tool, first aid kit, bear spray, and strapped on my sidearm. The weight of the holster was always a comfort, though in 10 years as a ranger, I'd never fired it outside of training. Another day in paradise, I muttered to the empty cabin as I shouldered my pack and stepped into the biting cold. The forest was eerily silent. Most winters in Blackwood came with a soundtrack. Chickadees calling, jays squawking, the occasional woodpecker hammering at dead snags. But today there was nothing except the crunch of snow beneath my boots and my own breathing, visible in small clouds that dissipated quickly in the still air. I followed the maintenance trail that wound up toward the old fire lookout. The tower had been decommissioned years ago, but still served as a useful landmark and emergency shelter. My task today was simple. Clear any fallen branches from the path, check for storm damage, note any unusual wildlife activity, and inspect the perimeter for illegal campers. 2 hours into my hike, I stopped to record coordinates at a fallen Douglas fir that had come down across the path. The tree was massive, at least 100 years old, with a root system torn from the ground as if yanked by some giant hand. The soil at its base should have been frozen solid this time of year. I knelt to examine it closer, running my fingers through the exposed earth. It was oddly warm. Soil temp approximately 50 degrees. I noted into my recorder. Inconsistent with surrounding ground freeze. Possible underground thermal activity. Not unheard of in this region. Blackwood sat at the edge of a dormant volcanic range. Small geothermal pockets occasionally formed, creating warm spots that confused local flora and fauna. Still, I'd need to flag this for the geological survey team. As I photographed the site, something caught my eye among the upturned roots. A flash of dull metal. I brushed away the loose soil to reveal what looked like the corner of a small box. With some effort, I extracted it from the tangled roots. It was a tin container, roughly the size of a cigar box, rusted at the edges but otherwise intact. Too weathered to be recent, yet not old enough to be historically significant. Probably some hiker's buried treasure or geocache. I should have left it where it was protocol for found objects, but curiosity got the better of me. The lid creaked open reluctantly. Inside was a single item, a small leather journal, its pages yellowed but preserved by the sealed container. The first page had a name scrawled in faded ink. Dr. Elias Thorne, Blackwood Research Station, 1976. I knew the name. Every ranger who worked Blackwood did. Dr. Thorne had been part of a controversial research team studying local wildlife patterns in the 70s. The entire team disappeared during a severe winter storm. The official report ruled it an avalanche death, though their bodies were never recovered. It became something of a local legend, embellished over campfires, the lost Blackwood scientists. And now, somehow, I was holding Thorne's journal. I told myself I'd turn it in when I returned to base. Instead, I slipped it into my breast pocket and continued my patrol, the unexpected weight pressing against my chest. The old fire lookout appeared through the trees as the sun reached its zenith. A tall, weather-beaten structure perched on stilts, its windows reflecting the midday light. I climbed the stairs, each wooden step groaning beneath my weight. Inside, the single room was just as I remembered from my last check 6 weeks ago. A simple cot, a desk with a weather monitoring system long out of use, a cast iron stove, and windows on all 4 sides offering uninterrupted views of the wilderness. I placed my pack on the desk and took out my lunch, a peanut butter sandwich and thermos of coffee. As I ate, I withdrew Thorne's journal and began to read. The early entries were mundane research notes, wildlife sightings, weather patterns, geological observations. But around the midpoint, the tone shifted dramatically. November 18th, 1976, Thompson heard it again last night. The sound coming from the North Ridge. He describes it as whale song filtered through rock. I still think it's just wind moving through the limestone formations, but he's convinced it's something else. Richards agrees with me, says Thompson's been alone at his observation post too long. But I've never seen Thompson so agitated. I flipped forward several pages. December 3rd, 1976. The equipment is behaving erratically. Compass needles spinning. Radio picking up nothing but that strange humming. Richards discovered a cavity in the North Ridge. Some kind of natural formation, a vertical shaft descending at least 100 feet. Air moving up from it is warm, much warmer than it should be. We're planning an expedition to explore it tomorrow. December 4th, 1976. The hollow goes deeper than we thought. Much deeper. Thompson lowered a weighted line 300 feet and didn't hit bottom. The sound is definitely coming from down there. Not wind. Not any natural sound I can identify. More like a voice? Multiple voices? Richards is eager to descend. I've advised caution, but he insists this could be the discovery of a lifetime. A completely unknown cave system, he keeps saying. I worry about the stability. The walls near the opening are unusually smooth, almost polished. December 7th, 1976, Richards hasn't returned. It's been 48 hours since he descended into the shaft. Thompson wants to go after him, but I've refused permission. I've called for emergency extraction, but the storm is making helicopter evacuation impossible. The sound from the shaft has changed. It's not continuous anymore. Now it comes in patterns that almost sound like words. The final entry was dated December 9th, 1976, the presumed date of their disappearance. The patterns repeat. I've been transcribing them. It's not random. They're speaking. God help me, something down there is speaking. Thompson went in this morning despite my orders. The radio won't work. I'm going to try to reach the emergency cabin at Clark's Ridge. If anyone finds this, do not approach the hollow in the North Ridge. Hears you, calls back in your voice. I closed the journal, my sandwich forgotten. The North Ridge, that was less than 3 miles from where I sat. A rocky formation locally known as Widow's Peak for its distinctive silhouette. I'd hiked it many times and never noticed any unusual openings or shafts. The wind picked up suddenly, whistling through the lookout tower's wooden frame. I glanced out the window and noticed dark clouds gathering to the west. Another storm approaching. I keyed my radio. Base, this is Sullivan at Lookout 1. We've got weather moving in. Also, I found something of interest. A journal belonging to Dr. Elias Thorne. Only static answered me. I tried again. Base, do you copy? I'm headed back before this storm hits. ETA 3 hours. Nothing. I packed up quickly, secured the lookout, and began my descent. The wind was picking up strength, driving icy particles against my face. The previously silent forest now creaked and moaned as the trees swayed. I needed to get back to my cabin before conditions deteriorated further. But as I hiked, a thought nagged at me. Widow's Peak wasn't far out of my way. I could make a quick detour just to see, just to confirm that Thorne's Hollow was nothing more than the delusion of an isolated researcher. It was a mistake. I know that now. The storm held off longer than expected, though the sky continued to darken as I diverted my route toward Widow's Peak. The formation rose before me, a jagged thrust of pale limestone that did indeed resemble a widow's shrouded profile against the gray sky. I climbed these slopes many times before, but today they seemed different. More treacherous, the rock faces smoother than I remembered. The wind had died completely, leaving an unnatural stillness that made the hair on my arms stand up despite the cold. Halfway up the northern face, I found it. Not a dramatic cave entrance as I'd imagined, but a simple hole in the ground, maybe 3 feet in diameter, partially hidden by a stunted pine. A perfect circle cut into the limestone as if by some precision instrument. I approached cautiously, remembering Thorn's warnings. The area around the opening was clear of snow despite the previous night's fall. When I knelt beside it, I understood why. Warm air flowed steadily from the shaft, carrying a faint, unidentifiable smell. Not sulfur, as you might expect from a geothermal vent. Something else. Something organic. I shone my flashlight into the opening. The beam penetrated perhaps 30 feet before darkness swallowed it. The walls were just as Thorn had described, unnaturally smooth, almost polished. Too regular to be formed by water erosion. Then I heard it. A sound so low I felt it more than heard it. A vibration that resonated in my chest cavity and made my eardrums ache. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds before fading. I waited perfectly still. 2 minutes later, it came again, slightly different in pitch and duration. A pattern just as Thorn had written, like something adjusting itself, tuning to a specific frequency. Common sense told me to leave immediately, to report this finding and let a properly equipped team investigate. But the ranger in me, the part trained to document and understand the wilderness, wanted more information. I took out my phone and activated the recording function, holding it over the opening. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, just as I was about to give up, the sound returned. Louder this time, complex and layered. And within it, unmistakably, a voice. Distant and distorted, but clearly forming words I couldn't quite make out. My phone's screen flickered and went black. When I tried to restart it, nothing happened. The battery, which had been at 87%, was completely drained. That should have been enough warning. I should have left then. Instead, I reached for my radio. Base, this is Sullivan. I found something at Widow's Peak North. Some kind of shaft or vent. I hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. There's some kind of audio phenomenon. Request geological team to investigate. The radio crackled, and through the static, I heard a response. Not the crisp professional tones of dispatch, but something else. My own voice, played back to me with perfect clarity. I found something at Widow's Peak North. Then another voice, one I didn't recognize. Richards hasn't returned. It's been 48 hours. And another, help me, please. I can still hear you up there. I dropped the radio like it had burned me, clattered on the rock and fell silent. The wind suddenly returned with violent force, nearly knocking me off balance. The storm was upon me, fat snowflakes swirling in chaotic patterns. I needed to get out of there. Now, as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small object at the very edge of the shaft that hadn't been there before. I leaned closer despite every instinct screaming at me to run. It was a compass. Modern design, the kind we issued to all rangers. This needle spun wildly, around and around without stopping. With shaking fingers, I picked it up and turned it over. On the back was engraved, "Property of Blackwood National Forest Service M. Sullivan." My compass, the one currently sitting in my cabin on my nightstand, where I'd accidentally left it this morning. I threw it into the shaft and ran. The storm hit with full force as I stumbled down the slope. Visibility dropped to mere feet, the world beyond a wall of swirling white. I navigated by instinct, knowing I needed to head east to reach the main trail that would take me south to my cabin. But something was wrong. The landmarks weren't where they should be. A distinctive lightning-struck pine I should have passed never appeared. A boulder formation I knew well seemed to have vanished. After an hour of increasingly desperate hiking, I was forced to admit the truth. I was lost. In my own patrol area, a section of wilderness I had crossed hundreds of times. My watch read 4:17 p.m. Daylight would be gone in less than 2 hours. If I didn't find shelter before nightfall, hypothermia would become a serious risk. I tried the radio again, but now it didn't even produce static, just dead silence. My fingers were growing numb despite my gloves. I needed to make a decision. Standard procedure for Lost Rangers was to find high ground, create a visible signal, and wait for rescue. But with no working communications and a storm this severe, no one would be looking for me until I failed to check in tomorrow morning. I had to find shelter and wait out the storm. The lookout tower was no longer an option. I was too disoriented to find my way back. But there was another possibility, the old research station. If I was where I thought I was, it should be less than a mile to the northwest. Abandoned after the Thorn incident, it was still a solid structure that would provide protection from the elements. I adjusted my course and pushed forward, fighting against wind that seemed determined to drive me back toward Widow's Peak. The light was nearly gone when I finally saw it. A low, bunker-like building partially covered in snow and ice. Relief flooded through me as I made my way to the entrance. The door was locked, but the window beside it had been broken long ago. I cleared away the shards and climbed through, collapsing onto the floor of what had once been the station's main room. For several minutes I just lay there, catching my breath, listening to the storm rage outside. When my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw that the interior was in surprisingly good condition. Dusty but intact furniture, filing cabinets, even some old equipment still in place. The Forest Service had apparently abandoned it in haste after the incident, leaving much of the research team's possessions behind. I found a kerosene lantern and, miraculously, matches that still worked. The warm glow revealed a space that felt frozen in time. Mugs still on desks, papers still in folders, a calendar from 1976 still on the wall, open to December. I shrugged off my pack and took stock of my situation. I had food and water to last until morning. The building was well insulated, and I found blankets in a storage closet. I would survive the night, and in the morning, with better visibility, I could find my way back to my cabin. As I arranged the blankets into a makeshift bed, an odd sensation came over me, a feeling of being watched. I glanced at the windows, but they showed nothing but the blind swirl of snow in the lantern light. "Just nerves," I said aloud, my voice unnaturally loud in the abandoned building. But I couldn't shake the feeling. It intensified as the hours passed, along with a growing pressure in my ears, as if I were deep underwater or at high altitude. I checked my watch repeatedly, watching the minutes crawl by with excruciating slowness. 10:42 p.m. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it had grown stronger, the wind howling around the building's corners like a living thing. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Instead, I began to explore the station more thoroughly, hoping the activity would quiet my mind. In what appeared to be Dr. Thorne's office, I found a recording device, an old reel-to-reel tape recorder. Beside it was a box of labeled tapes. One caught my eye immediately: Hollow Recordings, December 1st to 7th, 1976. I shouldn't have played it, but by then, I was too far down the rabbit hole, too consumed by the need to understand what had happened to Thorne and his team. The machine still worked, drawing power from somewhere. The tape hissed and popped as it began to play. First came Thorne's voice, clinical and detached. December 1st, 1976. First audio capture of the acoustic anomaly from the North Ridge cavity. Recording made approximately 20 feet from the opening. Then came the sound, the same resonant hum I had heard at the shaft, but clearer on the recording. Pulsed in a distinct pattern. Long, short, long, long, short. Thorne's voice again. December 3rd. Second recording made at the opening itself. Note the increased complexity and amplitude. This time, the sound was richer, with harmonics and undertones that made my teeth ache. And within it, almost subliminally, fragments of what sounded like speech. Too distorted to make out words, but unmistakably language-like. December 5th. Richards made this recording from approximately 100 feet within the shaft. Quality is poor due to equipment limitations, but the vocalization elements are much more pronounced. This recording was different, heavily distorted and broken by static, but through it came a voice that made my blood freeze. It spoke in clear, unaccented English. "We have been waiting for someone to find us. We have been alone so long." I nearly shut off the machine then, But what came next held me paralyzed. December 7th. Final recording before Richard's descent. Made at 300 feet depth according to his last transmission. God, I don't know if I can bear to listen to this again, but it needs to be documented. There was a long pause, then a new voice, presumably Richard's, breathless and excited. I've reached some kind of chamber. The shaft opens into, I can't even describe it, a space that shouldn't be possible at this depth. The acoustic properties are unlike anything I've encountered. And the walls, they're covered in some kind of inscription or pattern. They seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them. The air is breathable but has an unusual quality, almost thick, like high humidity, but different. Background noise increased, a rushing sound like wind or water. The sound is coming from deeper in. There's another opening, much larger. I'm going to proceed and wait. There's something. I see movement. Hello? Is someone there? Thorn, are you receiving this? I think there are people down here, but how could that be possible? They're watching me from the edges of my light. Oh God, they're coming closer. I recognize. No, that's impossible. You can't be here. You're not. The recording dissolved into harsh static. Then silence. Thorn's voice returned, shaking. Richard's transmission ended at that point. All attempts to re-establish contact have failed. Thompson insists we mount a rescue operation immediately. I've argued for waiting for external support, but he's not himself. He keeps saying he hears Richards calling to him. I don't hear anything except that damned humming. The tape ended there. My hands trembled as I removed it from the machine. Outside, the storm had reached a fever pitch, wind screaming around the building with such force that the windows rattled in their frames. The pressure in my ears had become painful, and with it came a new sensation. A vibration in the floor beneath me, subtle but unmistakable. Then the lantern flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. In the sudden silence that followed, I heard it, the humming. Not from outside, not from some distant shaft in the ridge, but here, in the room with me, pulsing with that same pattern. Long, short, long, long, short. My flashlight still worked. I swept its beam around the office, seeing nothing but dust and abandoned research. The humming grew louder, resolving itself into that same almost speech I'd heard at the shaft. I backed toward the door, heart hammering against my ribs. "Who's there?" I called, hating the tremor in my voice. The response came not in sound but in pressure, a sudden change in the air like the moment before a lightning strike. My flashlight flickered, and in that moment of darkness, I glimpsed something in the corner of the room. A silhouette that didn't belong, a human shape that was somehow wrong in proportion and movement. When the light stabilized, the corner was empty. I ran through the main room, toward the broken window I'd entered through. But as I approached, I saw that it was now intact. No break, no opening. The main door remained locked. I was trapped. The humming followed me, growing louder, surrounding me from all sides. The pressure built until I could barely breathe, my ears popping painfully. And then voices, dozens of them, layered over each other in a cacophony of pleas and warnings. "Help me. Don't trust what you see. They take your voice first. It's been so long. Run. Too late for that now." I spun in circles, my flashlight beam cutting through dust-filled air, revealing nothing but empty rooms and abandoned equipment. But I could feel them watching, from where I couldn't tell. Then my radio crackled to life without my touching it. Through waves of static came a voice I recognized. My supervisor, Ranger Collins. "Sullivan, do you copy? We've got your location. Hold tight. Extraction team is en route." Relief washed over me. "Collins, thank God. I'm at the old research station. The storm. We know. Just stay put. We're almost there." Something was wrong. Collins wasn't on duty this week. He was on leave visiting family in Colorado. I'd seen his vacation request myself. "Who is this?" I demanded. "Identify yourself." The radio hissed. Then, "It's Collins, Sullivan. Don't you recognize my voice? We've worked together for 3 years." It was his voice, perfectly rendered, but impossible. "You're not Collins," I said, backing away from my own equipment as if it had become a venomous snake. A pause, then, "No, but we needed a voice you would trust." The pressure in the room suddenly dropped, making my ears pop painfully. The windows imploded all at once, sending glass shards flying. The storm rushed in. Not snow and wind, but something else. Something dark and writhing that filled the room like living smoke. Within it, I saw faces forming and dissolving. Expressions of terror, pain, rapture. And voices, so many voices, all speaking at once. "We found you, just like we found them. You brought us back with you. From the hollow. We've been trying to return for so long." The smoke coalesced, taking shape, human shapes, dozens of them, their features indistinct except for their eyes, which reflected my flashlight beam like animals caught in headlights. I recognized some of them from old photographs. Thorne, Richards, Thompson, the lost research team, but there were others much older, dressed in clothes from different eras. And some weren't human at all, proportions wrong, movements jerky and unnatural. They surrounded me, drawing closer. I backed against the wall, fumbling for my sidearm, but knowing somehow it would be useless. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice a frightened whisper. "A way out," they said in unison. "A vessel." One reached for me, Thorne, or what had once been Thorne. His hand passed through my chest like cold mist, and something inside me shifted, making room for something else. I screamed, but the sound that emerged wasn't mine. They found me the next day, wandering along the main service road 6 miles from my cabin. The real extraction team sent when I failed to check in. They said I was babbling incoherently, my clothes torn, my body temperature dangerously low. Exposure and disorientation, the medical report stated. Temporary psychosis induced by hypothermia and isolation. They found no evidence of the journal, though they didn't search Widow's Peak. The storm had erased all traces of my tracks. I've been on medical leave for 3 weeks now. The voices have stopped, mostly. The pressure comes and goes. Sometimes, when I look in the mirror, my reflection moves a fraction of a second too late. They want me to see a therapist before I return to duty. I've agreed, knowing it won't help. Knowing that whatever came back from Blackwood isn't entirely me anymore. I dream of the hollow every night, of the space beyond the shaft, vast and ancient, where the boundaries between things grow thin, where voices echo forever, trapped between worlds. And in my waking hours, I fight the constant, growing urge to return, to complete what began that day, to open the way for those still waiting in the darkness. Sometimes I catch myself humming their pattern. Long, short, long, long, short. A call, a key, a door. They're patient. They've waited decades, centuries perhaps. They can wait a little longer for me to bring them through. But if you're reading this and you work in the wilderness, if you patrol the remote places where humans rarely tread, beware of perfect circles in the earth, of warm air where there should be cold, of voices that know your name before you speak it. And if you hear a humming, like whale song filtered through rock, run. Run and don't look back. Don't answer. Don't listen, because the hollow between echoes isn't empty, and it's learned to call in our voices. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks. That's what you tell yourself when you're 30 miles from the nearest outpost, surrounded by nothing but ancient cedar and the watching stars. I'd been stationed at Blackridge Wilderness Reserve for 3 seasons, and while the isolation gets to some rangers, I'd always found a certain peace in it. There's clarity in solitude, at least that's what I used to believe. April in the northern reaches of Blackridge brings unpredictable weather. The thaw comes in fits and starts, leaving behind a landscape half committed to spring. That morning had dawned crisp and clear, the kind that makes your lungs ache with the cold purity of the air. My breath hung in silver clouds as I checked my pack one last time before heading out. Standard procedure for trail maintenance after the winter months. 3 days back by Saturday, I'd radioed to Elkins at Central Dispatch, following the North Ridge Line to assess winter damage on Holloway Trail. Copy that. Weather looks stable, but we've got a front moving in Friday evening. Try to be back before then. I remember adjusting my pack straps, the familiar weight settling comfortably against my lower back. The leather of my boots creaked softly as I took the first steps along the pine needle path that would eventually connect with Holloway Trail. The sun filtered through the canopy in dappled patterns, warming patches of my face as I walked. Chickadees called from the branches above, their cheerful voices a counterpoint to the steady rhythm of my footsteps on the soft earth. Nothing seemed amiss. Nothing at all. By midday, I'd reached the ridge line, noting the fallen branches and occasional deadfall that would need clearing. Most of the winter damage was superficial, nothing a chainsaw and a day's work couldn't fix. I made notes in my weatherproof journal, marking GPS coordinates for the maintenance team. The work was methodical, satisfying in its ordinariness. It was late afternoon when I found the first anomaly. Holloway Trail follows an old hunting path that indigenous trappers used centuries ago. It winds between two mountain faces before opening into a small meadow that rangers nicknamed Eden for its perfect proportionality and surprising abundance of wildflowers. I was about a mile from Eden when I noticed the silence. Not gradual, not the natural quieting of birds as a predator passes. This was complete, as if someone had thrown a switch. One moment the forest hummed with life. Insects buzzing, birds calling, leaves rustling, and the next, nothing. The absence was so sudden it felt like pressure against my eardrums. I stopped, instinctively reaching for the bear spray on my belt. Black bears were common in this part of the reserve, and while they rarely posed a threat, caution was second nature after years of wilderness work. But there was no movement in the underbrush, no sign of large wildlife, just silence. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding flat and strange without the forest's ambient noise to cushion it. No response, not even an echo. The trees stood motionless, as if holding their breath. I checked my watch, 4:17 p.m. Still plenty of daylight left, but suddenly I felt the urge to make camp early. Something about the unnatural quiet made me want walls, however thin, between myself and the watching woods. I found a suitable clearing about 20 minutes further along the trail. By then, some sounds had returned. The soft sighing of wind through pine needles, the occasional distant cry of a hawk. But the usual chattering of squirrels and songbirds remained absent. As I set up my tent, I kept glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling of being observed. That night, I dreamed of hollow trees. In the dream, I walked through the forest, touching each trunk as I passed. One by one, they collapsed at my touch, revealing themselves to be nothing but bark, empty shells with nothing inside. The forest floor grew cluttered with these paper-thin husks, crunching beneath my boots until I could barely move forward. When I finally broke free into a clearing, I found myself surrounded by perfect circles of mushrooms, dozens of fairy rings stretching as far as I could see in the moonlight. I woke before dawn, unsettled and damp with sweat despite the chill. As I kindled a small fire for coffee, I rationalized away my unease. Dreams were just the mind processing the day's events, and I'd been thinking about bark beetle infestations before bed, a genuine concern for the eastern portion of the reserve. The silence from yesterday was likely just a coincidence, perhaps a passing hawk or eagle that scared the smaller wildlife into temporary hiding. The morning routine helped ground me. I checked in with dispatch, noting poorer than usual radio clarity but managing to confirm my position and plans for the day. After a breakfast of instant oatmeal, I broke camp and continued along Holloway Trail. By mid-morning, I'd reached Eden Meadow and found it much as expected. The first spring wildflowers beginning to emerge, creating patches of purple and yellow against the new green grass. I paused to photograph a particularly vibrant cluster of early lupin, documenting the season's progress for our ecological records. It was as I stood up from crouching for the photo that I heard it for the first time. A sound so peculiar that I initially couldn't identify it, something between a whisper and the hollow knocking of bamboo in the wind. But there was no bamboo in Blackridge, and the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line that encircled the meadow. Nothing moved. The sound came again, slightly louder, a rhythmic hollow tapping that seemed to reverberate through the ground beneath my feet. Tack, 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 tack. It lasted perhaps 10 seconds before fading away, leaving behind that same unnatural silence from the day before. My skin prickled with gooseflesh, and I found myself backing toward the center of the meadow, away from the trees. "Hello!" I called again, louder this time. "Is someone there?" My voice sounded small against the vastness of the sky above. No answer came, but as I listened, I became aware of another sound, the soft rushing of water. There was no stream marked on my trail map anywhere near Eden, but the sound was unmistakable. Curiosity overcame caution. I followed the sound to the eastern edge of the meadow, where the trees grew closer together, their trunks gnarled and ancient. Between two particularly massive cedars, a narrow game trail led deeper into the woods, in a direction not marked on any of our official maps. I hesitated. Protocol dictated that rangers stick to established trails unless responding to an emergency. But I was also responsible for documenting any changes to the landscape, including natural springs that might have emerged during the winter thaw. After a moment's deliberation, I marked my position on my GPS unit and stepped onto the unmarked path. The trail wound through increasingly dense forest, the canopy overhead gradually blotting out the sun. The temperature dropped perceptibly with each yard I traveled, until my breath once again formed clouds in front of my face. The rushing water sound grew louder, guiding me forward even as the path narrowed to little more than a deer track. After about 15 minutes of careful hiking, the trees opened into a small clearing dominated by a spring-fed pool. The water welled up from between moss-covered rocks, crystal clear and so cold it steamed slightly in the cool air. The pool itself was perfectly circular, perhaps 20 feet across, with a pebbled bottom visible all the way to its center, where the spring bubbled up continuously. It was beautiful, pristine, and completely wrong. I'd studied the hydrological surveys of Blackridge extensively. There should be no spring here, no pool. This entire area was supposed to be solid bedrock with poor water retention. Yet here it was, a perfect circle of water that looked as if it had existed for centuries. I approached cautiously, kneeling at the edge to test the water with my fingertips. It was ice cold but felt otherwise normal. Clear, odorless, with none of the sulfur smell that often accompanies natural springs in volcanic regions. Small, silvery fish darted away from my shadow, their movements quick and precise. As I watched the water, movement at the opposite edge caught my eye. A deer, unusually pale, had emerged from the trees and was approaching the pool. It moved with the careful grace typical of its kind, but something about its gait seemed off, too measured, almost deliberate. Its coat was so light it appeared almost white in the dappled sunlight, its eyes dark pools that reflected nothing. We regarded each other across the water, neither moving. The deer lowered its head toward the pool, but before its muzzle touched the surface, the hollow tapping sound returned. Louder now, insistent. Tack, 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 tack. The deer's head snapped up, ears pivoting toward the sound. For a long moment, it stared not at the source of the noise but directly at me. Then it turned and bounded back into the forest with unnatural speed, disappearing instantly among the trees. The tapping continued, rhythmic and somehow purposeful. I rose slowly to my feet, eyes scanning the surrounding forest. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, reverberating through the clearing as if the trees themselves were hollow. Then I saw them, small, dark holes in the trunks of the trees surrounding the pool. Not the work of woodpeckers or insects, but perfect circles bored directly into the wood at varying heights. As I watched, small puffs of what looked like fine dust or pollen emerged from several of the holes in time with the tapping, hanging in the air like miniature clouds before slowly dissipating. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through me. I backed away from the pool, suddenly desperate to return to the marked trail. As I moved, the tapping intensified, faster and more urgent. The dust or spores erupting from the holes grew thicker, forming a visible haze around the edges of the clearing. I turned and ran, no longer caring about maintaining ranger composure or scientific curiosity. Something was wrong here, fundamentally, irrevocably wrong. The unmarked path seemed longer on the return journey, twisting in ways I didn't remember from the walk-in. Twice I nearly lost it completely, saved only by the distinctive boot prints of my own passage. When I finally burst back into Eden Meadow, I was breathing hard, my heart hammering against my ribs. The ordinary sounds of the forest had returned: birdsong, insect buzzing, the soft rustle of leaves. Everything appeared normal, bathed in afternoon sunlight that suddenly seemed precious and rare. I checked my watch and felt another chill pass through me. According to the time, I'd spent over 3 hours exploring the spring and pool. But that couldn't be right. 30 minutes at most, surely. I checked my GPS unit, hoping to confirm my path, but the screen displayed an error message I'd never seen before: signal interference. Recalibrating. That night, I made camp well away from Eden, back on Holloway Trail proper. I chose a spot with good visibility, few surrounding trees, and easy access to the ridgeline if quick evacuation became necessary. As I went through the motions of setting up my tent and preparing a simple dinner, I tried to process what I'd seen. The spring couldn't exist. Not there, not in that geological formation. Yet I'd touched it, felt its cold water on my skin. The pale deer had been odd but not impossible. Leucistic animals occasionally appeared in isolated populations. But the holes in the trees, the rhythmic tapping, the dust or spores pulsing outward in time with the sound, I had no rational explanation for any of it. As darkness fell, I built my fire higher than regulations strictly permitted, finding comfort in its warm light and the barrier it created between myself and the surrounding darkness. I considered using the satellite phone to call for early extraction but hesitated. What would I say? That I'd found an impossible spring and some trees with holes in them? That I'd lost track of time? None of it constituted an emergency, and wilderness resources were too limited to waste on nervous feelings. Instead, I made detailed notes in my journal, recording everything I'd observed as objectively as possible. The facts, separated from my emotional response, seemed less threatening on paper. I'd submit a full report upon return and recommend a proper scientific survey of the area. There would be a logical explanation, there always was. I fell asleep with the fire still burning, my dreams once again filled with hollow trees and perfect circles. The tapping woke me just before dawn. Close now, unmistakable. Tack, 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 tack. It seemed to come from just beyond the dying embers of my fire, at the edge of the small clearing where I'd made camp. I lay perfectly still in my sleeping bag, eyes open, ears straining. The sound continued, maintaining its perfect rhythm, neither accelerating nor slowing. After several minutes of listening, I slowly reached for my flashlight, careful not to make any noise that might reveal I was awake. Flashlight in hand, I counted silently to 3, then sat up quickly, thumb finding the switch in the darkness. The powerful beam cut through the pre-dawn gloom, illuminating the trees at the edge of my camp. Nothing moved. The tapping had stopped the instant I'd sat up. I swept the light in a careful arc, examining each tree trunk, each shadow between them. Nothing seemed amiss, yet the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I kept the light on as I climbed out of my sleeping bag and pulled on my boots with cold-numbed fingers. The forest was silent again, that same unnatural quiet that had preceded my discovery of the spring. No birds announcing the coming dawn, no small animals rustling in the underbrush, just silence and the soft sound of my own breathing. I rebuilt the fire with methodical care, each movement precise and controlled despite the trembling in my hands. As flames licked upward through the kindling, I continually glanced over my shoulder, scanning the surrounding trees. The growing light revealed nothing unusual, yet the silence persisted, heavy as a physical presence. I decided then that I would abandon the rest of my patrol route and return to Ranger Station immediately. 3 days suddenly seemed too long to be alone in these woods. I'd blame it on the weather if necessary. The front that Elkins had mentioned was supposed to arrive tonight, and early departures due to weather changes were common enough not to raise questions. As I packed up my gear, moving with the efficiency of long practice, a new sound gradually became perceptible. A soft, rhythmic rushing, like gentle waves against a shore. The same water sound that had led me to the impossible spring, but somehow larger now, more encompassing. I froze, pack half assembled in my hands. The sound was coming from the direction I needed to travel to return to the station, back along Holloway Trail, toward the North Ridge Line. For a long moment, I considered my options. I could attempt to bushwhack an alternate route back, but that carried its own significant risks. Getting lost, injury far from help, or simply taking too long and being caught in the approaching storm. The safest choice was still to follow the established trail, despite the strange sounds coming from that direction. I finished packing quickly, doused the fire with more care than was probably necessary, and started back the way I'd come. The rushing water sound grew louder as I walked, eventually becoming so prominent that I found myself scanning the ground for signs of flooding or unexpected streams. But the trail remained dry, the surrounding forest showing no evidence of unusual water levels. After about an hour of hiking, I rounded a bend in the trail and stopped short. Ahead of me, where there should have been a continued path through pine and cedar, stood a massive wall of fog, thick, white, and completely opaque. It cut across the trail like a physical barrier, stretching up beyond the tree canopy and extending into the forest on either side as far as I could see. I approached cautiously, the rushing sound now clearly emanating from within the fog bank. The air grew noticeably colder as I drew closer, until I could see my breath forming small clouds that were quickly absorbed by the larger mass of white vapor before me. Standing at the edge of the fog, I had a choice to make. Turn back and find another way, potentially adding days to my journey, or press forward through the unnatural mist toward the sound of water that shouldn't exist. I chose to go forward, a decision I've questioned every day since. The fog enveloped me immediately, thick and cold and somehow heavy against my skin. Visibility dropped to less than 5 feet. I could see the ground directly beneath my boots and little else. The rushing sound surrounded me now, as if I were standing in the middle of a river rather than on solid ground. I kept the trail beneath my feet, moving slowly, one hand extended before me. The fog seemed to absorb the beam of my flashlight, rendering it nearly useless. Time became difficult to track. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the monotony broken only by the need to carefully place each foot to avoid tripping over unseen obstacles. The first tree I encountered in the fog made me jump. It appeared suddenly out of the whiteness, directly in my path where no tree should have been. I stepped around it, confused but still focused on maintaining my direction along what I hoped was still Holloway Trail. Then came another tree, and another, each materializing from the fog without warning, each in a place where memory told me no tree should stand. I began to suspect I'd somehow lost the trail despite my care. Unease blossomed into genuine fear as I realized I could no longer be certain of my location or direction. I stopped, fishing my compass from my pocket. The needle spun lazily, settling briefly before continuing its rotation. The GPS unit showed the same error message as before: signal interference, recalibrating. I was lost. Taking a deep breath, I reminded myself of wilderness survival basics. Stay calm. Stay put if thoroughly lost. Make yourself visible. But those rules assumed normal circumstances, not an impossible fog that defied weather patterns, not trees appearing where they shouldn't be, not the constant sound of rushing water with no source. As I stood considering my options, the tapping sound returned. Tack, tack, tack. Closer than ever before. I turned slowly, trying to pinpoint its source within the fog. There, a shadow, darker than the surrounding white. A silhouette of something tall and thin, moving with a jerking, unnatural gait. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding muffled in the dense air. "Is someone there?" "I'm Ranger Collins from Blackridge Station." The figure stopped moving. The tapping ceased. Then it changed direction, now clearly moving toward me through the fog. As it drew closer, I could make out more details, a humanoid shape too tall and too thin to be a normal person. Its movements were wrong somehow, disjointed, as if it were being operated like a marionette. I backed away slowly, one hand reaching for my bear spray, the other fumbling with my radio. "This is Ranger Collins. Does anybody copy? I have an emergency situation on Holloway Trail, approximately 6 miles northeast of Eden Meadow. Only static answered, punctuated by what sounded like distant fragments of voices, too distorted to make out words. The figure continued its approach, now close enough that I could see it wasn't solid at all, but composed of thousands of swirling particles, the same dust or spores I'd seen pulsing from the holes in the trees by the spring. They maintained the rough shape of a person while constantly shifting and realigning, like a swarm of insects moving with collective intelligence. My back hit something solid, a tree where none should be. The figure stopped about 10 feet away, its featureless face oriented toward me. For a long, terrible moment, we regarded each other in silence. Then it opened a hole in what would be its face, not a mouth, but a perfect circular void, and from it came the hollow tapping sound, now clearly recognizable as a form of communication. Tack, 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 tack.
Tak tak.
More figures began to emerge from the fog around me, each formed of the same swirling particles, each moving with the same puppet-like gait. They surrounded me in a perfect circle, just as the trees had surrounded the impossible spring. I raised the bear spray, though I doubted it would have any effect on beings made of dust. "Stay back," I shouted, voice cracking. "What do you want?" In response, they began to tap in unison, a complex rhythm that made the air vibrate around me. The sound grew until I could feel it in my chest, in my bones, in my teeth. The fog itself seemed to pulse with each beat, thickening and thinning in waves. Then, with perfect synchronicity, they each extended an arm toward me, not pointing, but offering palms up, fingers splayed. In the center of each palm was a hole identical to those I'd seen in the trees, perfectly circular and impossibly deep. The message was clear. They wanted me to come with them. I slid sideways along the tree trunk, trying to find a gap in their circle. There was none. They adjusted their positions fluidly, maintaining the perfect geometry of their formation. The tapping continued, now taking on an impatient quality, faster, more insistent. "I can't," I said, surprised to find myself responding as if they could understand. "I need to get back to the station." The figure directly before me tilted its head at an impossible angle, the particles of its form flowing like water to accommodate the movement. I stepped closer, hands still extended. I could now see into the hole in its palm. Not darkness, as I'd expected, but a miniature version of the spring I'd discovered, complete with pale fish swimming in its depths. Fascination momentarily overcame fear. How was this possible? What were these beings? Some kind of forest spirits? An undocumented indigenous presence? A hallucination brought on by spores or fungal toxins? The figure took another step toward me, close enough now that I could feel a subtle pull from the hole in its palm. Not physical, but something deeper, a tug on my consciousness itself. If I reached out, if I touched that impossible circle of water, the distant crack of thunder broke the spell. The approaching storm, reality reasserting itself in the most primal way. The figures paused, their tapping faltering for the first time. Another thunderclap, closer now, and they all turned their featureless faces upward as if listening. I seized the moment of distraction, ducking low and lunging between two of the figures. I expected resistance, some attempt to stop me, but they simply disintegrated as I passed through them, the particles of their forms scattering before reforming behind me. I ran blindly through the fog, no longer concerned with finding the trail, focused only on putting distance between myself and the circle of dust beings. The fog thinned suddenly, and I found myself running across open ground, a small clearing I didn't recognize. Rain had begun to fall, heavy drops that quickly turned to a downpour. I kept running until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, finally collapsing against the trunk of a massive cedar that offered some shelter from the increasingly violent storm. As I caught my breath, I realized the rushing water sound had finally stopped. In its place was only the natural patter of rain on leaves and the rumble of distant thunder. Normal sounds, real sounds. I fumbled for my radio, and to my immense relief, it crackled to life with actual voices. "Repeat, any rangers in the northern quadrant, be advised severe storm warning is in effect. Return to shelter immediately." "This is Collins," I gasped. "On Holloway Trail. Need extraction." There was a pause, Then Elkins's familiar voice came through. "Collins? You're breaking up badly. Did you request extraction?" "Affirmative," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "My position is..." I checked my GPS, which was finally functioning again. "Approximately 4 miles northwest of Eden Meadow. Possible medical situation." The last part was a necessary lie to ensure rapid response. Wilderness protocol prioritized potential medical emergencies over all other extraction requests. "Copy that, Collins. Sit tight. Helicopter dispatched from Central, ETA 40 minutes if weather permits. If not, ground team will reach you by morning. Can you confirm nature of medical situation?" I hesitated, then decided on another half-truth. "Possible exposure to unknown toxin. Experiencing disorientation and visual disturbances." "Copy. Maintain your position if possible. Conserve energy. Over." I leaned back against the cedar, the solid reality of its trunk against my spine, the most comforting thing I'd felt in days. The rain continued to fall, heavy enough now to form small rivulets that carved channels through the forest floor around me. As I watched their random patterns, a thought occurred to me. Water following the path of least resistance, finding its way down through the landscape, connecting high ground to low, surface to depth, just like the impossible spring had connected. What? This world to another? The physical realm to something else entirely? I shook my head, trying to clear away such fanciful notions. Elkins was right, I was disoriented. Probably from exhaustion, possibly from ingesting something toxic without realizing it. There would be a rational explanation for everything I'd experienced once I was back at the station, rested and hydrated and checked over by a medical professional. The sound of an approaching helicopter brought me back to the present, the rhythmic thudding of its rotors cutting through the storm. I fumbled in my pack for my emergency flare, pulling the cord to send a bright red signal arcing above the canopy. As I waited for the rescue team to locate me, I became aware of something odd about the tree I was leaning against. The bark against my back didn't feel right, too smooth, too uniform. I shifted position and turned to examine it. The entire side of the cedar facing away from the clearing was honeycombed with holes. Perfect circles bored deep into its trunk. And from within those holes came a faint, barely perceptible sound. Tack, tack, tack. I stumbled away from the tree just as the first rescue worker reached the edge of the clearing, waving and calling my name. I waved back automatically, eyes still fixed on the holes. As I watched, fine particles began to drift from them, swirling in the rain-heavy air. "Over here!" the rescue worker shouted, gesturing for me to join him. "Can you walk? What happened out here?" I turned toward him, opened my mouth to explain, and found I couldn't. How could I possibly describe what I'd seen? What would happen if I tried? Would they search for the impossible spring? Would they find the circle of dust beings waiting in the fog? Or would they find nothing at all, confirming that I'd lost my grip on reality? "Food poisoning, I think," I said instead, the lie coming easily. And then I got lost in the fog, panicked a bit. I forced a sheepish smile. "Sorry for the emergency call. Better safe than sorry, right?" He nodded, accepting the explanation without question, as he helped me toward the clearing's edge where the rescue helicopter waited. As we walked away, I glanced back once at the cedar with its hidden circles. In the fading light through the curtain of rain, I thought I saw pale shapes beginning to form from the drifting particles. Tall, thin figures assembling themselves at the forest's edge, watching silently as I was carried away from their domain. I never reported what I really saw in Blackridge. My official statement mentioned only unexpected fog and temporary disorientation. They diagnosed me with mild dehydration and possible exposure to naturally occurring hallucinogens, likely from mushroom spores in the abnormally damp conditions. A perfectly rational explanation. I requested a transfer the following week and was reassigned to a desert conservation area in the southwest, as far from the forests of Blackridge as the service could send me. I told everyone it was for my health, that I needed drier air for my sinuses. Another easy lie. But sometimes, in the stillness of desert nights, I hear it again, that hollow tapping sound, like something knocking from inside a tree that isn't there. Tack, 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 and I wonder if what lives in the woods of Blackridge has found me again, or if it never left me at all, if perhaps I carried some small part of it away inside me, like spores waiting for the right conditions to bloom. I keep my windows closed now, even in the hottest weather, especially when it rains, and I never, ever answer when I hear that tapping in the dark.